Welcome to Tales by Imon. Today, we descend into the crushing darkness of the abyss, into a story of courage, mystery, and the chilling echoes of the deep. Settle in, and let the currents of our tale pull you under. The perpetual twilight of the submersible's cabin was a world unto itself. Dr. Caleb Vance, his face illuminated by the soft, cerulean glow of the sonar display, watched the layered blackness outside with a familiar blend of scientific curiosity and primal awe. For 20 years, the deep ocean had been his laboratory, his sanctuary, his obsession. This expedition, however, felt different. There was a palpable tension in the recycled air of the Stardust, a state-of-the-art deep-sea vessel engineered to withstand pressures that could pulverize tungsten. They were descending into the Puerto Rico Trench, a place where sunlight was a forgotten myth, and the creatures that thrived were the stuff of nightmares and evolutionary marvels. The mission was straightforward, yet audacious: to deploy a new generation of seismic sensors on the trench floor, promising to unlock secrets of the Earth's tectonic ballet. "Anything on the long range, Jessica?" Caleb asked, his voice calm but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. His gaze remained fixed on the swirling abyss outside the thick viewport. Jessica Riley, the Stardust pilot and a former naval officer with nerves of cold-rolled steel, had her hands moving with practiced efficiency across the main control panel. Her eyes, sharp and focused, scanned a dozen different readouts simultaneously. "Negative, Captain," she replied, her tone crisp and professional. "Just the usual abyssal chatter and the echo of our own pings. The pressure is holding steady at 12,000 psi and climbing. We're passing the 8,000-meter mark. Everything's green across the board. Copy that. Keep a sharp eye. This deep, the rulebook gets rewritten with every meter we drop." Their mission was more than just seismic sensor deployment. Officially, it was a geological survey. Unofficially, they were chasing a ghost. A series of anomalous, low-frequency acoustic signals had been detected by a Navy listening post weeks earlier, originating from a location no human had ever visited. The signals were patterned, almost rhythmic, and utterly baffling to the analysts. The Navy wanted answers, and Caleb's expedition was the perfect cover. The third member of their crew, Dr. Ben Carter, a brilliant but perpetually anxious astrobiologist roped into the mission for his expertise in extreme environments, was hunched over his own console, analyzing water samples in real time. "The extremophile density is off the charts, Caleb," he murmured, his brow furrowed in a familiar knot of concentration. "But there's something else, a trace element signature I've never seen. It's not on the periodic table. It's structured, almost like a manufactured isotope." Caleb swiveled in his command chair, his interest piqued. "Manufactured? What are you suggesting, Ben?" Before Ben could articulate his wild theory, a low, resonant thud echoed through the titanium hull. It wasn't the groaning complaint of metal under extreme pressure they were all accustomed to. This was sharp, distinct, and worryingly solid. An impact. Jessica's hands flew across her console, her professional calm instantly sharpening to a razor's edge. "Status report. Hull integrity is at 100%. No breaches, no pressure fluctuations. External cameras are. Wait a minute." On the main view screen, the inky blackness, previously pierced only by the Stardust's powerful external LED arrays, was now filled with a swirling cloud of bioluminescent particles. They pulsed with a soft, ethereal gold, like a silent, slow-motion explosion of a dying star. It was beautiful and deeply unsettling. "What in God's name is that?" Ben breathed, his face now pressed against the thick acrylic of the side viewport. "It's beautiful," Jessica whispered, for a fleeting moment captivated by the impossible light show in the deepest, darkest place on Earth. "It's a defense mechanism," Caleb stated, his scientific mind kicking into high gear, overriding his sense of wonder. "Something we startled. Jessica, can you get the manipulator arm camera focused on the point of impact?" "On it, Captain." The view on a secondary monitor shifted, showing the perspective from a camera on the Stardust's robotic arm. The arm extended, its own light cutting through the shimmering golden cloud. And then they saw it. A structure. It was massive, far larger than any known deep-sea organism or geological formation. It wasn't rock. The surfaces were too smooth, the angles too precise. It was a dark, matte black material that seemed to absorb the light, revealing a faint, intricate pattern of geometric lines etched across its surface, lines that pulsed with a faint, internal light of their own. "That's not a geological formation," Jessica said, her voice barely a whisper, the previous awe in her tone replaced by disbelief. That's a wall." Caleb felt a cold dread crawl up his spine, a sensation he hadn't experienced since his very first terrifying open-water dive as a student. He had dedicated his life to uncovering the secrets of the deep, but this was something beyond all comprehension. an artificial structure 8 kilometers beneath the surface of the Atlantic. It was impossible. It violated every known law of physics and engineering. Ben, are your sensors still picking up that strange isotope? Caleb asked, his mind racing, trying to connect the impossible dots. It's stronger now, Caleb. Off the scale. And the acoustic anomaly, it's no longer a ghost. The source is right here. It's inside that thing. As if on cue, a section of the dark wall began to glow with the same ethereal gold as the bioluminescent cloud. The geometric lines pulsed brightly, forming a complex, shifting pattern that was undeniably deliberate. It was a language of light, a message from the abyss. It's responding to us, Jessica said, her hands hovering over the controls, her pilot's instincts screaming. It knows we're here. The light intensified, and a low hum vibrated through the Stardust's hull, a sound that seemed to resonate not just in their ears, but deep within their chests. The water outside began to churn, and the 20-ton submersible was caught in a current that wasn't natural. They were being pulled, drawn inexorably towards the glowing section of the wall. I'm losing control, Captain. Jessica grunted, her knuckles white as she wrestled with the joystick. The thrusters are at maximum, but they're not responding. It's like we're caught in a whirlpool. It's some kind of localized energy field, Caleb deduced, his eyes wide with a terrifying mixture of fear and exhilaration. He was a scientist witnessing the impossible. It's got us in a tractor beam. The glowing section of the wall slid open with impossible smoothness, revealing an aperture of pure, inky blackness. It was a doorway, an invitation into an unknown that humanity had never even dreamed of. As the Stardust was pulled helplessly towards it, the last thing they saw on their external monitors before being swallowed by the darkness was the shimmering golden light of the alien message, a silent welcome to a world that shouldn't exist. The fiber-optic communications link with the surface ship, their only tether to the sunlit world thousands of meters above, crackled with a burst of static and then went silent. Their last message had been sent, not with words, but with the telemetry data stream of their impossible discovery. And as the silent door closed behind them, plunging them into absolute, suffocating blackness, a new chapter of their existence began. It was a chapter to be written by the silent, ancient intelligence that resided in the crushing heart of the ocean. The story of the Stardust was no longer one of exploration, but of survival in a world beyond human imagination. The transition was instantaneous and absolute. One moment, they were being dragged by an irresistible force, the external monitors filled with a hypnotic golden light. The next, they were suspended in a silence so profound it felt like a physical pressure against the hull. The low hum of the energy field was gone, replaced by a void of sound that was even more unnerving. It was the silence of a tomb. Absolute blackness pressed in from every direction, swallowing the Stardust's powerful lights as if they had never existed. The only light was the faint, familiar blue and green glow of their own instrument panels. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound inside the cabin was the frantic, ragged breathing of its 3 occupants. Jessica was the first to break the spell. Her training kicked in, a bulwark against the rising tide of panic. "Systems report," she commanded, her voice a tight, controlled wire. "I've got manual control back. Thrusters are responsive. Life support is nominal. All green on my board. We're stable. We're floating." Caleb unglued his eyes from the blank view screen. He took a steadying breath, the air tasting metallic with adrenaline. "Ben, what are your readings? Where are we?" Ben's fingers were a blur across his console's touch screen. His face was pale in the monitor glow. I don't know. This is impossible. According to the external pressure sensors, we're at 1 atmosphere. Standard sea level pressure. But the depth gauge is still reading over 8,000 meters. The 2 readings contradict each other. They cannot coexist. "Run diagnostics on the sensors," Caleb ordered, his mind grasping for a logical explanation where none existed. "I've already run them 3 times, Ben stammered, his voice rising in pitch. "They're functioning perfectly. Caleb, the water chemistry has changed completely. Salinity is near 0. This is fresh water. We're in a pocket of fresh water at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean under 800 atmospheres of pressure, and the pressure inside this pocket is normal." A pocket. The word hung in the air. Not a cave, but a bubble of impossibility carved out of the crushing deep. "Jessica," Caleb said, his voice hard as iron. "External lights. Full power." "Aye, Captain. Full power." Jessica's fingers danced over the console. Outside the viewport, a cone of brilliant white light erupted, cutting into the oppressive darkness. But it didn't illuminate a tight, enclosed space as they expected. The light beam shot outwards, stretching into the void, seemingly endless. They weren't in a cave. They were in a cavern so vast their lights couldn't find the walls. The water was crystal clear, devoid of the usual marine snow and detritus of the abyssal zone. Below them, the floor was made of the same smooth, dark, non-reflective material as the wall outside. "I'm picking up a ceiling," Jessica reported, pointing the sub's dorsal sonar array upwards. "A solid one, about 50 meters above us." "A ceiling? Take us up," Caleb commanded. "Slow and steady." The Stardust rose silently through the strange, clear water. As they ascended, Ben's environmental sensors went wild. "Caleb, I'm detecting a gaseous atmosphere above the water's surface. Nitrogen, oxygen, it's breathable. It's almost identical to Earth's atmosphere." The crew fell silent again, the implications of Ben's words sinking in. A contained, breathable atmosphere in a sealed cavern at the bottom of the ocean. The concept was beyond science fiction. It was something else entirely. The top of the Stardust broke the surface of the water with a gentle ripple. Water streamed down the viewports. They were floating on a perfectly calm, subterranean lake. Switching to external cameras, wide spectrum, Jessica announced. The main view screen flickered, then stabilized, showing them their new reality. They were in a cavern of incomprehensible scale. The ceiling, hundreds of meters above the water surface, was not rough-hewn rock but a perfectly smooth, vaulted dome made of the same dark material, which seemed to gently absorb and diffuse the light from their sub, preventing any harsh glare. Faint, geometric patterns, similar to the ones on the outer wall, crisscrossed the entire visible surface, pulsing with a barely perceptible, faint golden light. It was as if they were inside a planet-sized geode, lined not with crystals, but with alien technology. "My God," Ben whispered, a tear tracing a path down his cheek. It wasn't a tear of fear, but of overwhelming, terrifying wonder. "It's a terrarium. A biosphere." Caleb stared, his mind struggling to process the scale of it all. They had traveled to the deepest point on Earth only to find a new world, hidden away from their own. But they were not alone. His eyes scanned the horizon of their subterranean sea, searching the endless black. That's when he saw it. "Jessica, kill the main lights," he said, his voice quiet. "Captain, just do it. Switch to low-power running lights only." Jessica complied. The brilliant white beams vanished, and the Stardust was plunged back into near-total darkness. The faint golden light from the patterns on the ceiling provided just enough illumination to see the outlines of their impossible prison. For a moment, there was nothing but the vast darkness. Then, in the far, far distance, a single steady point of light appeared. It was small, but it was clear, and it wasn't from their vessel. It wasn't the shifting, organic light of bioluminescence. It was a fixed, artificial light, like a streetlight on a lonely road, or a lamp in a distant window. It was a sign of habitation. "Is that a light?" Ben asked, his voice trembling. "Yes," Caleb confirmed, his heart pounding in his chest. "It is." They weren't just in an impossible place. They were in someone else's impossible place. And that someone else was still here. The mission to deploy seismic sensors was a distant memory, a task from another lifetime. Their new mission had just become chillingly clear. Find out who switched on that light, and pray they were friendly. The single point of light, a tiny beacon in an ocean of impossible blackness, became their sole focus. It was their North Star in a universe that had been turned inside out. The initial shock of their situation was beginning to calcify into a cold, hard resolve. Fear was still present, a low-frequency hum in the background of their thoughts, but it was being overridden by the powerful human imperatives of curiosity and survival. They had a destination. They had a purpose. "Okay," Caleb began, his voice steady, projecting a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Here's the plan. Jessica, full silent running. Minimal power to non-essential systems. We approach that light with all the stealth this boat can muster. I don't want to go in loud. We have no idea who, or what, is over there." "Aye, Captain." Switching to silent operation. "We're a ghost," Jessica confirmed, her fingers gliding across the controls. The ambient hum of the submersible's life support and circulation system seemed to diminish, a subtle change that made the vast silence outside feel even more immense. The Stardust began to move forward, a silent predator in a sea of unknowns, propelled by its low RPM electric thrusters. "Ben, I want every sensor we have focused on that light source and the space between here and there. I want to know if there's a dust mote in this water that I don't know about. Spectrometer, gravimeter, magnetic field sensors, the works. If anything changes, anything at all, you shout." "Already on it, Caleb," Ben replied, his anxiety now fully channeled into a feverish focus on his work. He was a scientist in the face of the ultimate unknown, and it was a role he was born to play. The water is fascinating. Still fresh, but the trace mineral composition is unlike anything I've ever seen. And there's life in here. Caleb and Jessica both turned to look at him. Life? Are you sure? Jessica asked. Positive. Microbial, for the most part. But the biological markers, it's DNA but not as we know it. A triple helix structure, and it seems to be using xenon in its respiratory cycle somehow. It's fundamentally alien. As the Stardust glided silently across the vast, subterranean lake, a new spectacle unfolded below them. The sub's downward-facing lights revealed a landscape on the lakebed that was not barren. It was a forest, but not of plants. Strange, crystalline structures rose from the dark floor, branching out like frost on a windowpane. They were arranged in spiraling, geometric patterns that seemed too perfect to be natural. As the sub's light passed over them, they would pulse with a soft, internal blue light, a chain reaction of illumination that followed them on their journey. It's like the whole floor is a circuit board, Jessica murmured, watching the display from the belly cam. They're responding to our light, Ben observed, typing furiously. Photosensitive, but they're also emitting a low-level energy field. This whole ecosystem, it's interconnected. It's engineered. Their journey continued in this tense silence for what felt like hours. The only markers of progress were the dwindling distance-to-target numbers on the navigation screen and the slow, hypnotic dance of the glowing forest beneath them. The point of light in the distance grew steadily, resolving itself from a star into a lighthouse. It was not a single bulb, but a glow emanating from the top of an immense structure. The sonar began to paint a clearer picture. It was a tower. A single, impossibly tall spire rising from the center of the lake, so tall its peak was lost in the vaulted darkness of the ceiling high above. It was made of the same dark, matte material as the rest of the cavern, but this structure was alive with light. Golden energy, the same hue as the patterns on the ceiling, coursed through the geometric lines etched into its surface, all flowing towards the brilliant beacon at its apex. I'm getting a better reading on the structure, Jessica reported, her voice hushed with awe. It's massive. The base has to be at least a kilometer in diameter. It extends all the way to the lakebed, and maybe further down. We're approaching the base now. ETA, 5 minutes. Any energy readings, Ben? Caleb asked, leaning forward, his eyes fixed on the view screen where the base of the tower was now becoming visible. A massive one. The whole tower is humming with power, Caleb. Not electromagnetic, not nuclear. It's a form of energy I can't classify. It's stable, controlled, but the output is astronomical. Enough to power a city for a century, being generated every second. The Stardust slowed to a crawl as it reached the perimeter of the tower's base. It was like a fly approaching a skyscraper. The sheer scale was disorienting, designed to humble. They followed the curve of the wall, its surface a complex tapestry of light and shadow. They were searching for a way in, a sign of welcome or warning. They found it a few hundred meters along the structure's circumference. Set into the wall was a portal, a massive archway at least 30 meters high, positioned just below the waterline. It was sealed, the pattern of golden lines flowing across it seamlessly. It was unmistakably a door. A grand entrance. Jessica brought the Stardust to a complete stop, hovering in the water about 100 meters from the gate, its lights illuminating the strange, alien architecture. The three of them stared in silence, the culmination of their journey leading them to this single, silent threshold. They had found the source of the light. They had found the heart of the mystery. What do we do now, Captain? Jessica asked softly. Caleb opened his mouth to answer, but before he could speak, Ben gasped. Energy spike. A massive one, localized right at that door. On the view screen, the golden lines on the giant archway began to glow with intense, brilliant light. The intricate patterns began to shift and reconfigure, like the tumblers of a colossal, complex lock. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the water, a sound so low it was felt more than heard. It wasn't a sound of aggression, but of acknowledgement, of activation. The silent, ancient intelligence in the deep had been waiting, and now it was answering the door. The great door did not open in any conventional sense. There were no grinding gears, no sliding panels. Instead, the brilliant golden lines that formed the intricate lock pattern dissolved into a billion motes of light, a swirling vortex of liquid energy that spiraled inwards to the very center of the archway. The vortex then collapsed into itself and vanished, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, illuminated tunnel leading into the heart of the colossal tower. The water within the passage was still and clear, glowing with a soft, internal luminescence that beckoned them forward. It was a silent, undeniable invitation. For a long moment, the only sound in the Stardust was the soft hum of its life support systems. The decision that now faced them was monumental, a fulcrum upon which the fate of their lives, and perhaps the future of their species, rested. "Captain, we can't," Jessica said, her voice low and steady, betraying no fear, only pragmatic concern. "Once we go in there, that's it. We have no idea if we can get back out. Our power is finite. We're on our own." Standard protocol for an unknown variable of this magnitude is to observe, document, and retreat. "Retreat where, Jessica?" Caleb countered, his gaze fixed on the glowing portal. "Back into that dark lake. To wait until our oxygen scrubbers fail or our power cells die. Out there, we have 100% chance of dying. In there," he trailed off, letting the unspoken possibilities hang in the air. "In there, we have a chance at answers. That's a variable worth exploring." "He's right," Ben added, his voice barely a whisper. He was staring at his sensor display, his eyes wide. "The energy readings from inside are stable. There's no radiation, no detectable threats. It's quiescent, waiting. Whatever built this place, it doesn't seem hostile. It's behaving like a machine that's just been switched on." Caleb made the decision. It felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, the next logical step in a journey that had long since departed the map of human experience. "Jessica, take us in. Slow and steady. Ben, record everything. Every photon, every energy fluctuation. If we don't make it out, this data log will be our last message." "Aye, Captain," Jessica replied. Her personal reservations were set aside, replaced by the crisp focus of a pilot with a job to do. With a masterful touch, she nudged the Stardust forward, crossing the invisible threshold from the known into the utterly alien. The submersible glided into the illuminated tunnel. As soon as the last inch of their vessel cleared the entrance, the motes of golden light reappeared behind them, swirling back into place to reform the solid, impassable door. They were sealed in. The sound of the external silence was now absolute. The tunnel was wider than it appeared from the outside, extending for several hundred meters. It was not a simple tube, but an architectural marvel, the walls carved with the same intricate, glowing patterns. It felt less like a corridor and more like a grand hall designed for giants. The passage ended abruptly, opening into a chamber so vast it defied comprehension. They surfaced the Stardust into a cavernous space inside the tower, a mirror of the lake outside but utterly different in purpose. This was not a biosphere, it was a cathedral of knowledge. The air was cool, sterile, and perfectly still. Water lapped gently against a massive, circular docking platform that formed the center of the chamber's floor. But it was the walls that stole their breath. From the floor to the impossibly high, domed ceiling, the walls were lined with millions of glowing crystalline structures, each humming with a soft, internal light. They were arranged in perfect, symmetrical patterns, a library of unthinkable scale. "It's a database," Ben stammered, his scientific mind reeling. "Those crystals, they have to be data storage. The amount of information here, it would be more than all the digital data created in human history combined. By orders of magnitude." Jessica guided the Stardust expertly into a recessed area of the platform that seemed perfectly sized for the submersible, a purpose-built dock. With a soft bump, they came to rest. As the vessel settled, the chamber around them began to change. The ambient golden light brightened, and the air in the center of the vast room began to shimmer, coalescing into forms. Holographic projections, crisp and three-dimensional, materialized out of thin air. They weren't images of aliens or creatures, but of pure data, a silent symphony of information. A complex, rotating triple helix molecule, the very DNA structure Ben had detected in the water, appeared before them, its components labeled in a script of elegant, geometric symbols. It was followed by a stunningly detailed animation of a star igniting, of planets forming from a protoplanetary disk. They were being shown the fundamentals of physics, chemistry, and biology. A lesson was beginning. Caleb, Jessica, and Ben could only watch, transfixed, their own world, their own mission, their very identities shrinking in the face of this overwhelming display of intellect and artistry. The projections shifted, the lesson moving from the universal to the specific. A new image formed, one that was achingly familiar. It was a perfect, three-dimensional map of the Milky Way galaxy. Billions of points of light swirled in majestic, silent arms. A moment later, two of those points began to glow brighter than the rest. A thin, blue line zoomed in on one of them, revealing the familiar shape of the Orion arm, and then further, to a single, unremarkable yellow star. One of its small, rocky planets was highlighted. Earth. Their home, displayed to them by an intelligence that had been watching from the crushing darkness of their own planet's deepest trench. Then, a second line of light drew their attention to the other glowing point, far across the galaxy in a distant, unnamed spiral arm. The projection zoomed in, showing another star system, this one with a massive gas giant orbited by a large, temperate moon. A line of pure white light then connected the 2 points, a bridge across 100,000 light-years of empty space. The message was unambiguous. There was no sound, no voice, but the communication was as clear as a shout in a quiet room. It was an introduction, a statement of origin delivered in the universal language of astronomy. We are from there. You are from here. Welcome. The ancient, silent intelligence of the deep finally had a voice, and it was showing them their place not just in the world, but in the cosmos. The question was no longer who the builders were, or where they were from. The new, terrifying question was, where are they now? The star map hung in the air for a long, silent minute, a testament to a journey across an unimaginable void. The implications washed over the 3 occupants of the Stardust in successive, crushing waves. First, the profound, earth-shattering confirmation that they were not alone in the universe. Second, the humbling realization that this intelligence was not a contemporary, but an ancient legacy. And third, the chilling question that Caleb had voiced, which now echoed in the vast, silent library. Where are they now? As if in answer, the holographic star map dissolved, the billions of tiny lights folding in on themselves before expanding into a new, breathtaking vista. They were no longer looking at a map, but through a window. The projection showed them a sky dominated by a colossal, ringed gas giant, its swirling bands of orange and purple filling the horizon. They were seeing the home world, a large moon bathed in the soft light of its parent planet. The landscape was alien yet hauntingly beautiful, with crystalline forests that mirrored the ones in the lake below, and graceful, impossibly slender cities that spiraled towards the sky, seeming to be grown rather than built. Ethereal figures of light, humanoid in their basic shape but lacking any distinct features, moved through these cities with a purpose and grace that was mesmerizing. There was no sound, but the crew of the Stardust could almost hear the hum of a perfectly harmonious, advanced civilization. This was the answer to who the builders were. A species that had mastered energy, biology, and architecture to a degree that humanity could barely comprehend. They were artists, engineers, and, by all appearances, peaceful. The idyllic scene then began to shift. The projection pulled back, showing the entire star system. Their sun, a brilliant white star, began to flicker erratically. Its color shifted towards a violent blue, and its corona swelled, lashing out with solar flares of apocalyptic scale. The celestial mechanics playing out before them were terrifyingly clear. Their star was dying. It was expanding, preparing to consume the very worlds that it had nurtured. It was not a war or a plague that ended this great civilization, but the simple, inexorable, and violent reality of stellar evolution. The display then showed the frantic, final act of this species. Not an act of war, but an act of preservation. Thousands upon thousands of vessels, each identical in design to the tower they were now inside, were shown launching from the doomed moon. They were not warships or colony arcs, but seeds, flying in every direction into the black void of space. Each one a time capsule, a library, a final, desperate message in a bottle cast into the cosmic ocean. The last projection was of their beautiful world being consumed by the fiery, expanding shell of their own sun. Then, the hologram faded, leaving the crew once again in the quiet, golden light of the archive. Silence. My God, Ben whispered, his voice thick with emotion. They're gone. They're all gone. Jessica stared blankly at the space where the hologram had been. The pilot, the pragmatist, was shaken. It wasn't an invasion force. It wasn't a colony. We're sitting inside a tombstone. A library for a dead civilization. The weight of their discovery settled on Caleb. They were not the discoverers of a new alien species, but the recipients of a final will and testament. The knowledge in this room, the legacy of a species that had reached for the stars and been struck down by them, was now theirs. But Jessica's words brought back their own reality with chilling clarity. A library doesn't have a rescue boat, Caleb said, thinking aloud. We're still trapped. We have the greatest discovery in human history at our fingertips, and we're going to suffocate a few hundred meters away from it. As if the archive itself were listening, the ambient light in the chamber shifted again. The soft, diffuse glow that illuminated the crystalline walls dimmed, and a single, bright beam of light shone down on the docking platform, just in front of the Stardust's main viewport. A section of the smooth floor retracted, and a pedestal rose silently from the depths. Atop the pedestal rested a single object. It was a smooth, ovoid stone, dark and matte like the walls, small enough to be held in one hand. A network of the familiar golden, geometric lines was etched into its surface. As they watched, the lines began to pulse with a soft, warm light, like a slow, steady heartbeat. It was not a weapon. It was not a tool in any recognizable sense. It was an offering, an interface. The message of the holograms had been a passive one. This is who we were. The message of this object felt active, a direct and personal question. Who are you? The three of them stared at the object, a bridge between two species separated by eons and unimaginable distance, now resting only a few meters away. The archive had shared its story. Now, it seemed to be asking for theirs. Touching it would be an act of faith, a step into an even deeper unknown. It could be the key to unlocking this vast library, the key to their survival. Or it could be the final, fatal mistake in a chain of impossible events. The pulsing light of the object seemed to call to them, a silent, patient question waiting for an answer in the deepest, most isolated place on Earth. And the choice of who would provide that answer hung heavy in the recycled air of the submersible. The pulsing, handheld ovoid sat on its pedestal, a silent arbiter of their fate. Inside the Stardust, the debate was brief but intense, a microcosm of the eternal human conflict between caution and curiosity. "Absolutely not, Captain," Jessica stated, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We don't know what that thing is. It could be a power conduit, a biological scanner, a weapon. For all we know, the air out there is a long-acting neurotoxin, and we're just feeling the first effects. Opening that hatch and touching an unknown artifact is an unacceptable risk. It's the only option we have." Ben countered, his voice strained with a desperate urgency. "Don't you see the logic? It showed us its history, a passive act of introduction. Now it's offering a tool for active communication. Everything this place has done has followed a logical, non-hostile sequence. It's the key, Jessica. It has to be. It might be the only way to ask the most important question. How do we open the door?" Caleb listened, weighing their arguments, but his decision had already been made. Passivity in the face of the unknown was a luxury they could not afford. They were on a clock, measured not in hours but in the slow, inevitable depletion of their resources. Ben is right. It's a calculated risk, but it's the only move we have. Jessica, your concerns are noted, and they're valid, which is why I'm the one going out. Caleb, Jessica began to protest. "I'm the captain, Jessica. The responsibility for this crew is mine. The risk is mine. That's final." He turned away from the viewport and began the suiting up procedure. It was minimal, just a light suit and a clear helmet with a comms link. The internal sensors had confirmed the atmosphere was safe, but caution was still paramount. The process of him leaving the submersible was imbued with a heavy, almost ceremonial tension. The hiss of the inner hatch sealing, the low hum of the outer hatch cycling open. Then, silence. Caleb stood in the open airlock, breathing in the sterile, alien air. It was cool and tasted of nothing, like the air in a clean room. He stepped out onto the dark, smooth platform. His boots made no sound on the strange material. He was the first human being to set foot in this impossible place, the first to stand in a room built by beings from another star. He walked slowly towards the pedestal. The golden light from the ovoid pulsed in a steady, calming rhythm, its glow reflecting softly off his helmet's faceplate. He could feel the eyes of his crew on him from the submersible's viewport. He was their avatar, their outstretched hand. He reached the pedestal and stood before it for a long moment, taking one last steadying breath. Then, he reached out his gloved hand and placed it gently on the ovoid's smooth, cool surface. The effect was instantaneous and overwhelming. The moment his glove made contact, the golden light flared, engulfing his hand and arm. But the true impact was internal. It was not a shock, not a burn. It was a connection. A torrent of pure information, raw and unfiltered, flooded his mind. He didn't see images or hear words. He felt. He experienced. He was submerged in a conceptual ocean of 1 billion years of existence. He felt the joy of discovery as the builders first mapped their own genome. He felt the profound sorrow of a parent star's betrayal. He felt the cold, hard logic of their final, desperate plan for preservation. It was a civilization's entire emotional and intellectual history, its art, its science, its philosophy, poured directly into his consciousness in a single paralyzing moment. It was the weight of a world, the ghost of a species, and it was too much for a human mind to bear. From inside the Stardust, Jessica and Ben watched in horror. The light from the object had enveloped Caleb completely, his body going rigid, his head thrown back. At the exact same moment, the entire chamber responded. The millions of crystals lining the walls began to pulse in a synchronized cascade of light, energy flowing from the outer walls towards the center, all converging on Caleb. The entire tower was focusing its power, its attention, on him. He wasn't just touching an object, he was shaking hands with a god. "He's convulsing. I'm going out there." Jessica shouted, moving to unstrap herself. Wait! Ben yelled, pointing at the chamber walls. Look! The patterns are changing. It's reading him. Just as suddenly as it began, the connection broke. The light vanished. The crystals on the walls returned to their soft, ambient glow. The ovoid on the pedestal went dark. Caleb collapsed to his knees, his gloved hand falling away from the now inert object. He remained there for a moment, head bowed, his body trembling. Caleb! Caleb, answer me! Are you okay? Jessica's voice was frantic over the comms. Slowly, Caleb lifted his head. He turned to look at them through the viewport, his face pale, his eyes wide with an emotion that was beyond fear, beyond awe. It was the look of a man who had stared into infinity and seen it stare back. He raised his hand to his helmet's microphone, his movements shaky. His voice came through the speakers, a raw, ragged whisper, forever changed by what it had just experienced. It knows us, he breathed. It knows everything. Our history, our language, our DNA. It's all in here. He paused, taking a shuddering breath before delivering the words that would once again shatter their understanding of their predicament. This place, it wasn't just waiting to be found. It was searching. It was looking for something specific. For a compatible heir. Jessica didn't wait for an invitation. The moment Caleb finished his shocking pronouncement, she activated the airlock sequence. A few seconds later, she was on the platform, Ben right behind her, their earlier caution thrown to the wind by the urgent need to help their captain. They found Caleb still on his knees, his breathing ragged, his eyes staring at the inert ovoid on the floor as if it were a venomous snake. Caleb, what happened? What did it do to you? Jessica asked, helping him to his feet. He felt unsteady, his weight leaning heavily on her. It didn't do anything to me, Caleb managed to say, his voice raspy. It connected with me. Ben, you were right. It's a communication device. But it communicates everything, all at once. They helped him back into the Stardust, his movements slow and clumsy, like a man relearning how to use his own limbs. Once inside, with the hatch sealed, he sat heavily in his command chair, pulling off the helmet. He looked at his two crewmates, and they saw in his eyes the lingering shadow of the infinite abyss he had just witnessed. It's not just a library, he began, speaking slowly, trying to translate an experience that was beyond language. It's a mind. A dormant, planetary-scale intelligence. The collective consciousness of the builders, their memories, their knowledge, all encoded into the very fabric of this place. They didn't just save their books, they saved their souls. Ben was pale, his hands trembling slightly. A collective consciousness. So they're still here. Yes and no, Caleb said, shaking his head. The individuals are gone, but their essence, their intelligence, remains. It's been asleep, dreaming in the deep for eons. Its final directive was to wait, to watch the galaxy through its sensors, and to search. Search for what? Jessica pressed, her pragmatism cutting through the metaphysical haze. For us, Caleb answered simply. Or a species like us. The archive wasn't meant to be a memorial. It's an inheritance. They knew their time was over, but they couldn't bear the thought of their knowledge dying with them. So they designed the archive to find a species that could carry the torch. It was looking for a specific set of parameters, a carbon-based biology, a certain threshold of technological advancement, a complex emotional spectrum, and the neurological capacity to interface with it without going insane. The ovoid was the final test, a key that could only be turned by a conscious, biological mind. When I touched it, it read me. It scanned my biology, my thoughts, my memories, and through me, it saw all of humanity. He looked up at them, his expression one of profound awe and terror. Our chaotic, violent, beautiful, contradictory nature. It was exactly what it was looking for. It has accepted us. We are the compatible heirs. As if summoned by his words, the chamber outside the Stardust came to life again. The vast, empty space in the center of the room shimmered, and a new hologram materialized. It was not a history lesson this time. It was a vast, three-dimensional, intricate web of light and symbols, a celestial tree of knowledge. Glowing nodes pulsed with light, labeled with the alien geometric script, but as they watched, the symbols morphed, translating themselves into English. Astrophysics, quantum mechanics, xenobiology, materials science, medicine, philosophy, art. It was the archive's table of contents, a user interface for the accumulated knowledge of a galactic civilization. Ben stared, his mouth agape, his lifelong quest for knowledge culminating in a moment he could never have imagined. his eyes fixated on a branch labeled Triple Helix Genomics. Jessica, however, was scanning for something else entirely. Her eyes, trained for efficiency, found it almost immediately. In a quieter, less ostentatious corner of the display was a simple, utilitarian node labeled Archive Systems. Branching from it were subnodes: power regulation, life support, atmospheric control, and then, the one they desperately needed, external interface and egress protocols. "There," Jessica said, her voice tight with relief. "Caleb, right there. That's our ticket home." At that moment, the pedestal on the platform rose once more, the ovoid resting on top, its golden light pulsing softly again. It had recharged. It was ready. Caleb looked from the promise of freedom on the holographic display to the infinite library of secrets that surrounded them, and then back to the ovoid. He reached down and picked up a data slate, his movements now more confident. He walked to the hatch, his purpose clear. "What are you doing?" Jessica asked. "The ovoid is the key," Caleb explained, his mind now processing the influx of information, understanding dawning in his eyes. "But it needs a vessel to pour the information into. I can't hold it all in my head. I can use our technology to interface with it." He stepped back out onto the platform, this time with a sense of authority. He picked up the ovoid with one hand and held the data slate in the other. He knew, with an instinct that hadn't been his a few moments ago, how to operate the display. He was the librarian now. He stood before the tree of knowledge, the choice now his. Before him lay the secrets to faster-than-light travel, the cure for every disease, the answers to the deepest philosophical questions. And in the corner, the simple instructions for opening the front door. The immediate need for survival wrestled with the boundless temptation of ultimate knowledge. The fate of his crew, and the new, unimaginable fate of humanity, rested on the first selection he would make. The weight of the choice pressed down on Caleb, a pressure nearly as palpable as the thousands of meters of water above their heads. Before him lay the accumulated wisdom of a lost galaxy, the answers to questions humanity had not yet learned how to ask. To his left, Ben's face was a mask of pure scientific rapture, his eyes drinking in the infinite possibilities. To his right, Jessica was a portrait of tense focus, her gaze locked on the single node that promised survival. In that moment, Caleb saw the two sides of his own heart, the explorer and the captain, warring for control. The explorer yearned to plunge into the sea of knowledge. But the captain had a duty. "We can't learn anything if we're dead," Caleb said, his voice echoing with finality in the quiet of the submersible's comms. "We're securing our exit. Then, we can talk about what comes next." He gave Ben a look of sincere apology, a silent promise that this opportunity would not be wasted, and then turned his full attention to the task at hand. He raised the ovoid. The device pulsed warmly in his hand, a living key responding to his intent. With a deliberate slowness, he guided the interface's selection tool, a shimmering point of light, away from the grand categories of science and philosophy and towards the humble, utilitarian node labeled Archive Systems. He selected the subnode for external interface and egress protocols. The reaction was immediate. The selected node glowed with the intensity of a small sun. The rest of the holographic tree faded into the background, and a focused stream of golden light, thick with swirling geometric symbols, shot from the hologram, through the ovoid in Caleb's hand, and directly into the data slate he held in his other. The slate's screen flickered, instantly overwhelmed. Alien script flowed across the display faster than the eye could follow before a translation protocol kicked in, rewriting the information into flawless English, accompanied by precise, complex engineering schematics and animated simulations. Caleb stepped back into the Stardust, and the three of them huddled around the data slate, their heads close together in the cool blue light of the cabin. The escape plan was both brilliant and terrifying. It wasn't a simple matter of opening the door and making a run for it. The archive couldn't just negate the 800 atmospheres of pressure outside. Instead, it would create a pathway through it. The instructions called for them to connect the Stardust's primary power conduit to a recessed interface port on the docking platform. Once connected, the archive would channel an immense surge of its own power through the submersible systems, using the sub as a focusing lens. This energy would then be projected from the tower's main gate, creating a stable, contained, low-pressure corridor, a physical tunnel through the water, that would extend all the way from the tower to the ocean surface, 8 kilometers straight up. The Stardust would then simply have to travel up this temporary, artificial wormhole to freedom. It was an act of engineering so far beyond human capability that it felt like magic. But as they scrolled deeper into the schematics, Ben's expression shifted from awe to concern. "Caleb, look at these energy projections. The power requirement it's astronomical. A sustained terawatt discharge for the entire duration of the ascent. The archive can handle it, can't it?" Jessica asked, her eyes tracing the pathway of the simulated energy tunnel. It can, Ben confirmed, pointing to a section of the data. But there's a cost. A big one. To generate and maintain the corridor, the archive will have to divert nearly 90% of its total operational power from its primary core. The life support, the holograms, the data crystals. This entire chamber will go into a low-power hibernation state. It's a sacrifice. It's putting itself to sleep to let us go. The news landed with a thud, adding an unexpected emotional weight to their escape. This ancient, sentient place, their captor and their teacher, would have to cripple itself for their sake. There was no time for sentiment. They had a plan, and they had to execute it. Okay, let's get to work, Caleb commanded, his tone all business. Jessica, you're on the arm. You'll need to position us perfectly and make the connection. It has to be precise. Ben, I need you monitoring our power systems. When that energy surge comes through, you need to make sure our conduits don't melt. I'll stay on the platform and use the ovoid to initiate the sequence from the archive side. We'll have to sync this perfectly. The crew moved with a renewed, singular purpose. Jessica's hands flew across the controls, the Stardust thrusters firing in minute bursts as she nudged the 20-ton submersible into the exact position indicated on the schematics. Using the external cameras, she expertly commanded the vessel's main manipulator arm, extending it from its housing. At its tip was the thick, heavy-duty power conduit. Ben furiously typed commands into his own console, bypassing safety limiters and reinforcing energy shields, preparing their sub for a power surge it was never designed to handle. Outside, Caleb stood on the platform, the ovoid in one hand, the data slate in the other, a conductor orchestrating an impossible symphony. He watched the manipulator arm on the view screen inside the Stardust as it brought the conduit closer and closer to the interface port, which now glowed with a welcoming golden light. Position is locked, Jessica's voice came over his helmet comms, calm and steady. Ready to connect on your mark. Power systems are green. We're as ready as we'll ever be, Ben added, his voice tight with nervous energy. The moment had arrived. The conduit hovered a mere inch from the port. Everything was in place. Their complex preparations, their impossible journey, all boiled down to this single, final command. Caleb looked through the viewport at his crew, and they met his gaze with determined nods. He took a deep, final breath of the alien air. On my mark, he said, his voice ringing with authority. 3, 2, 1. Execute. The word execute hung in the air for a fraction of a second, a final, sharp command before the universe exploded into controlled chaos. On Caleb's mark, Jessica nudged the joystick forward. The heavy power conduit on the manipulator arm slid home into the archive's glowing interface port with a solid metallic thud that they felt through the entire hull. The connection was instantaneous. A torrent of pure, golden energy, brighter than the sun, erupted from the port, engulfing the manipulator arm and washing over the front of the submersible. Inside, every light flickered. A dozen alarms shrieked at once, a cacophony of digital panic. The Stardust groaned under a strain it was never built to withstand, the very atoms of its titanium hull vibrating with the raw power of a dying star. Power surge is off the charts. I'm trying to stabilize the flow. Ben yelled over the alarms, his hands a blur on his console. Screens filled with cascading red alerts. Rerouting excess power to the secondary capacitors. It's too much. The converters are starting to overheat. Hold it together, Ben. Just for a few minutes. Caleb shouted, his voice transmitted from his helmet as he stood on the platform. His attention was fixed not on the sub, but on the chamber around him. He was a witness to a great and solemn event. As the energy poured into the Stardust, the light in the archive began to die. The millions of data crystals that lined the walls, each a universe of knowledge, dimmed row by row, from the top of the dome downwards. The great holographic tree of knowledge flickered and dissolved into nothing. The ambient golden glow that had filled the chamber faded, and a profound darkness crept in from the edges, a final silent exhalation. Soon, the only light left was the blinding glare from the power connection and the Stardust's own external lamps, casting long, lonely shadows in the tomb of a forgotten world. A deep, resonant hum echoed as the main gate of the tower began to dissolve. The swirling motes of light revealed the view outside, but it was not the still, black water of the lake. It was the mouth of a swirling vortex, a tunnel of incandescent energy boring a hole straight up through the abyss. The exit corridor was forming. The gate is open. The corridor is stabilizing. Jessica reported, her voice tight with concentration. Caleb, get back in here now. Caleb didn't need to be told twice. He turned and scrambled for the airlock, the heavy boots of his suit feeling clumsy and slow. He dove through the hatch, sealing it behind him just as a new alert chimed. "Corridor is stable and at full power," Jessica announced. "Detaching docking clamps." With a series of loud clicks, the Stardust was released. Caleb stumbled into the cabin as Jessica expertly disengaged the power conduit from the port. The blinding light outside vanished, and the chamber was plunged into true, final darkness. Jessica fired the thrusters, and the submersible moved forward, a tiny vessel of light leaving the silent, sleeping archive behind forever. They entered the energy corridor. The transition was like being fired from a cannon. The ride was anything but smooth. They were in a tunnel of pure, shimmering force, its walls a translucent, rippling barrier against the multi-ton pressure of the deep ocean. Outside the shimmering walls, the black water was distorted, and the occasional, grotesque form of an abyssal creature would flash by, drawn to the impossible light before being violently thrown aside by the energy field. The Stardust shot upwards at a tremendous speed. The depth gauge was a blur, spinning backward as they ascended thousands of meters in mere minutes. 4,000 meters. Ben called out, his eyes glued to the readouts. 3,000. Power flow from the archive is steady, but our converters are still redlining. The strain is incredible. They were a projectile of hope, ascending from the deepest hell to the surface of their world. As they passed the 1,000-meter mark, the crushing blackness above them began to give way to a faint, deep blue. And in the center of that blue was a shimmering, dancing circle of pure white light. The surface. The sun. Just then, a single line of text appeared on the main navigation screen. It wasn't an alert or a system diagnostic. It was the same elegant, alien script from the archive, which quickly translated itself into two simple, profound words. Begin anew. A final instruction. A benediction. A passing of the torch. They stared at it, the true weight of their journey, of what they were bringing back with them, settling in their hearts. They were no longer just a crew of explorers. They were messengers, carrying the legacy of a lost world. 100 meters. Jessica shouted, her voice filled with a joy and relief so powerful it almost cracked. "I can see the surface waves. We're going to make it." As she spoke, a new alarm, sharper and more frantic than all the others, began to scream through the cabin. A plume of black smoke erupted from a console near Ben's station. "No!" Ben yelled. "The primary energy converter. It's critical. The containment field just failed. It's going to blow the entire stern section. We have maybe 20 seconds." The circle of light was right there, so close they could almost feel the sun on their faces. Freedom was a mere handful of seconds away. Jessica slammed the thrusters to their maximum emergency power, a desperate, final push. The Stardust surged forward, racing the catastrophic failure of its own systems, a final, desperate sprint towards the light. 20 seconds. The words from Ben were a death knell, sharp and clear even through the screaming alarms and the hiss of escaping vapor. Black, acrid smoke was now thick in the cabin, choking the recycled air. Red warning lights strobed across their faces, painting the scene in flashes of impending doom. "I'm bypassing the final safeties, diverting all remaining power to the main thrusters," Jessica yelled, her hands a blur of motion. She was no longer piloting a submersible. She was trying to keep a bomb from detonating for just a few seconds longer. The Stardust shuddered violently, every plate and rivet groaning in a final, agonizing protest. 15 seconds. Ben coughed, wiping soot from his eyes. "The casing is starting to buckle. It won't hold." Through the main viewport, the circle of sunlight was no longer a distant hope but a blinding, beautiful reality. They could see the undulating waves, the dance of light on the water's surface. It was a different universe, a paradise they were meters away from. Caleb gripped a console to steady himself, his mind a focal point of calm in the storm. "Jessica, don't try to surface smoothly. Punch through. Use the last of the momentum." "That was always the plan, Captain," she shot back, a grim smile on her face. 10 seconds. Brace for impact. The final few meters were a blur of blue water and white light. The Stardust, a wounded beast making one final, desperate charge, rocketed upwards. The moment it broke the surface was not gentle. It was an explosion. The submersible launched itself clear out of the ocean, a 20-ton missile of titanium and fire, hanging in the air for a single, impossible second against the backdrop of a clear blue sky. For that 1 second, there was a strange, suspended silence. Then, gravity reasserted itself, and two things happened at once. The Stardust slammed back down into the water with a cataclysmic crash, and its stern erupted in a brilliant, deafening explosion of fire and shrapnel. The force of the blast tore the rear third of the submersible clean off, and the tortured scream of metal giving way was drowned out by the roar of the detonation. The energy corridor that had been their lifeline, its focal point now obliterated, collapsed instantly, vanishing without a trace. The gateway to the archive was closed. Inside the cabin, they were thrown violently forward. The lights died completely, plunging them into a terrifying darkness filled with the sound of rushing water. The main viewport cracked, crazing like a spiderweb but miraculously holding against the immediate pressure. Cold Atlantic seawater surged into the cabin from the shattered rear bulkhead. "Everybody out! Now!" Caleb roared, his voice cutting through the chaos. He unstrapped himself and fumbled in the darkness for the emergency release kit. His fingers found the inflatable life raft pack. Jessica hopped the hatch. Ben grabbed the emergency beacon and the data drives. Jessica, already moving, slammed her hand against the manual release for the top hatch. With a groan of protesting metal, it blew open, and glorious, life-giving daylight flooded the wreck. Ben, thinking fast, grabbed not only the beacon but also the data slate with the archive's egress plans and the precious ovoid, which had rolled under a console. One by one, they scrambled out of the flooded cabin and onto the listing, forward section of the Stardust, which was sinking fast. Caleb deployed the raft, and it inflated with a loud hiss, a bright orange beacon of hope against the deep blue of the ocean. They threw the gear in and then themselves, paddling frantically to get clear of the wreck. They were no more than 50 meters away when the Stardust gave its final surrender. The bow lifted towards the sky, a final silent salute, and then the wreck slid backward into the sea. For a few moments, there was a chaos of churning water and escaping air. Then, there were only bubbles. And then, silence. The three of them sat in the small raft, drenched, bruised, and gasping for breath under an empty sky. The sudden peace was as shocking as the violence that had preceded it. There was only the gentle rocking of the waves and the vast, indifferent horizon. They had done it. They had survived. They had escaped the deepest part of the world and touched the sky. But as the adrenaline began to fade, a new, colder reality set in. They were alive, but they were adrift in the middle of the Atlantic. Their submersible, their only way home, was gone. Their communications equipment was at the bottom of the sea, along with a vast majority of the archive's secrets. Ben activated the emergency beacon, but its tiny blinking light felt like a pathetic plea against the sheer scale of the ocean. Jessica, the navigator, scanned the horizon in all directions, her eyes searching for a ship, a plane, a smudge of land, and finding nothing. Caleb looked down at the objects they had managed to save, now resting at the bottom of the raft. The data slate, its screen now dark. The blinking beacon. And the ovoid. He picked it up. It was cool to the touch, its golden light extinguished. It was just a smooth, dark stone now, its magic seemingly gone, expended in their escape. The sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The beauty of it was cruel. They had returned to their world only to find themselves more isolated than ever. They had the story of a lifetime, the knowledge of a lost species, but they were just three souls in a tiny raft, with a dwindling hope of ever being able to tell it. The first sunrise was the hardest. After a night spent in shock, huddled together for warmth against a chilling sea breeze, the first rays of dawn brought not hope, but a harsh, unforgiving clarity. The sun rose over a perfectly flat, featureless horizon, revealing the sheer, terrifying emptiness of their world. They were a tiny orange speck in an endless bowl of blue, the sky above as vast and indifferent as the ocean below. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion and the cold, heavy stone of reality. They were alive, but they were profoundly lost. Jessica's training took over, a necessary anchor in the swirling currents of despair. With a quiet efficiency that belied their desperate situation, she took inventory. Their emergency kit was standard issue, a small medical pack, 3 solar blankets, a flare gun with 6 cartridges, a signal mirror, and a desalting pump. The most critical items were the rations. They had 12 high-calorie nutrient bars and, most precious of all, 10 1-liter cartons of purified water. "Okay," she announced, her voice a little hoarse but firm. "New rules. 1 bar per person, per day. Half a liter of water each. No exceptions. We don't know how long this has to last." Ben, who had been staring blankly at the horizon, nodded numbly. The scientist in him was already running the grim calculations. A human can survive 3 weeks without food, but only 3 days without water. Their clock was already ticking. He clutched the hard drive containing his sensor logs, a fragile link to a world of logic and reason that felt a million miles away. Caleb, as captain, knew his role was to manage not just their supplies, but their morale. "She's right. We stick to the plan, we stay disciplined, and we wait. The beacon is active. The Navy knows our approximate location. It's a big ocean, but they'll be looking for us. The day wore on with an agonizing slowness. The sun beat down, its warmth turning from comforting to oppressive. They rigged one of the solar blankets as a makeshift canopy, creating a small patch of shade where they huddled, the air thick with the smell of salt and sun-baked rubber. The silence was broken only by the gentle sloshing of waves against the raft and the occasional, jarringly loud cry of a distant seabird. To combat the encroaching despair, they talked. They relived their impossible journey, their words a way of confirming that it had actually happened, that it wasn't some shared, stress-induced hallucination. "Those crystalline forests," Ben murmured, his voice distant. "The triple helix biome. All that data, just gone. We were sitting in the Library of Alexandria, and all I got was a single page." "We got more than that, Ben," Caleb said, his voice quiet but firm. He held up the dark, inert ovoid. "We got the key. We got the introduction. And we got the mission." "Begin anew," Jessica quoted, her eyes on the horizon. "What does that even mean? What are we supposed to do, if we even make it back?" "I don't know," Caleb admitted. He ran his thumb over the smooth, cool surface of the stone. "But I felt it. When I touched this thing, it wasn't just a data transfer. It was a feeling, a desperate hope. They didn't want their knowledge to just be studied. They wanted it to be used, to guide, to help another species avoid the same fate." As dusk fell, the crushing heat gave way to a sudden, piercing cold. They wrapped themselves in the other solar blankets, their meager rations for the day a distant memory. The sky, free from any light pollution, erupted with a tapestry of stars so brilliant it was dizzying. It was the same sky they had seen in the archive's hologram, a stark reminder of the true scale of their story. They agreed to take 2-hour watches through the night. Caleb took the first. While Jessica and Ben slept the fitful sleep of the exhausted, he sat at the edge of the raft, the ovoid in his hands, his mind replaying every moment since their descent. He felt the immense weight of his responsibility, not just for the lives of his crew, but for the legacy of the race that had entrusted him with its final message. He turned the smooth stone over and over in his hands. It was lifeless, a simple rock, a souvenir from a lost world. He thought about the blinding energy it had contained, the consciousness it had held. Was it all expended? Was the archive truly just a sleeping tomb now? He stared at the stone, his eyes adjusting to the faint starlight. And then he saw it. Or, he thought he saw it. Deep within the stone's dark, obsidian-like material, a single tiny point of light glowed for less than a heartbeat. It was a faint golden spark that was there and then gone, so fast he instantly questioned his own senses. His heart began to pound. Was it a trick of the light? A reflection from a distant star? Or was it his own exhausted mind, projecting his desperate hope onto an inanimate object? He held the stone closer, staring at it with an intensity that made his eyes ache, waiting for it to happen again. But there was nothing. Just the cold, dark, smooth surface. He didn't tell the others. How could he? He wasn't even sure himself. But as he sat there, alone in the vast, silent darkness of the Atlantic, a new secret seed of wonder began to grow. The connection might not be as severed as he thought. The archive might be sleeping, but perhaps a tiny part of its soul was still awake, right there in the palm of his hand. The third day adrift was when the ocean truly began to assert its dominance. The world shrank to the size of their 10-foot raft, and time lost its meaning, measured only in the agonizingly slow crawl of the sun across a bleached white sky. Their routine became a grim, monotonous ritual centered around the hand-cranked desalting pump. It was a tedious, exhausting piece of manual labor, requiring 2 hours of constant, steady pumping to produce a single liter of fresh, metallic-tasting water. It was the most important job in their world, and they hated it with a passion. The strain began to fray the edges of their discipline. Ben, the man of intellect and data, found himself in a world that responded only to brute physical force, and it was breaking him. On the fourth day, Caleb found him hunched over the solar-powered data slate, its screen displaying complex energy decay simulations. "Ben, what are you doing?" Caleb asked, his voice gentle but firm. "I'm calculating the half-life of the beacon's power cell," Ben muttered, not looking up. "Based on its output, I project we have another 80 to 90 hours of transmission time before it dies completely. The statistical probability of a vessel intersecting our position in that time frame is not encouraging." "Turn it off, Ben," Jessica said from the other side of the raft, her voice flat with exhaustion. She had just finished her shift on the pump, and her arms ached. "You're wasting the battery on calculations that don't help us." "Information is never a waste," Ben snapped, his voice cracking. "It's all we have. Or have you forgotten that?" I haven't forgotten anything, Jessica retorted, her patience worn thin. Including the fact that if we can't power the beacon, your statistical probabilities become 0. Turn it off. Enough, Caleb said, placing a hand on Ben's shoulder. Jessica's right. We save the power for the beacon. We focus on the things we can control, the pump, the rations, the watch. That's it. Ben stared at the screen for a moment longer before sighing, a ragged sound of defeat, and switched it off. The conflict was over, but the tension remained, a fourth, unwelcome passenger in their raft. Caleb's secret observation of the ovoid became his private focus, a mystery that kept his own mind from dwelling on the grim mathematics of their survival. During his watches in the dead of night, under the cold, silent gaze of the stars, he would hold the stone. The faint, internal pulse of light happened again on the third night, and this time it was stronger, lasting for a full second. He was sure of it now. It was not a trick of the light. The archive was not entirely dormant. A wild, desperate idea began to form in his mind. The first connection had been overwhelming, a passive reception of 1 billion years of data. But he had initiated it with a simple, physical touch. What if he could do it again? What if he could control it? On the night of their 5th day adrift, as a sliver of moon cast a pale, ghostly light on the black water, he decided to try. Ben and Jessica were asleep, their faces etched with worry even in slumber. The world was quiet. Caleb held the ovoid in both hands, its surface cool and smooth against his salt-chafed skin. He closed his eyes. He shut out the sound of the waves, the chill of the air. He focused his mind, reaching back to the moment in the tower. He tried to replicate the feeling, the sense of openness, of connection, of being a conduit. He thought about the archive, its vastness, its silent, sleeping consciousness. He focused all his will on the object in his hands, not asking a question, but simply listening. For a long time, nothing happened. There was only the darkness behind his eyelids and the rhythmic rocking of the raft. Doubt began to creep in. It was a stupid idea, the fantasy of a dehydrated, desperate man. He was about to give up when it happened. A flash of gold bloomed behind his eyes. The feeling was completely different from before. It was not a violent, overwhelming flood, but a gentle, specific touch, like a single finger pointing the way in a vast, dark room. He was not in the raft anymore. He was not even on Earth. For a single, disorienting second, he was looking down upon a world of red sand and ochre rock, a planet under a thin, pink sky. He saw a landscape of craters and colossal, dust-choked canyons. His viewpoint plunged, soaring down into one of these canyons, a place of deep, ancient shadow. And there, half buried by millennia of red dust but unmistakably clear, was a pattern of geometric lines etched into the canyon wall. It was another gate. Another archive. On Mars. The vision vanished. He was back in the raft, his own gasp for air loud in the night stillness. The ovoid in his hands was now distinctly warm, a low, pleasant heat that spread through his palms. The knowledge settled into his mind, not as a feeling or an abstract concept, but as a cold, hard fact. The archive on Earth was not unique. The builders had been thorough. They had seeded their legacy not just on one world in the solar system, but on at least 2. The implications were staggering, a paradigm shift on top of a paradigm shift. Caleb! Jessica's sleepy voice cut through his reeling thoughts. Everything okay? He looked over at her, her form a mere silhouette in the darkness. His heart was pounding, his mind racing. He now carried a secret far greater than a flicker of light. He held the proof that humanity's destiny, its future, was not just on Earth, but scattered among the planets. It was a truth that could inspire a new age of exploration. It was also a truth that, spoken aloud in their current state, would sound like the ravings of a madman. Yeah, he lied, his voice hoarse. Everything's fine. Just a cold night. He clutched the warm stone, the new heavy burden of knowledge settling upon him, a secret kept in the lonely darkness, miles from anywhere. The knowledge of the Mars archive changed something fundamental in Caleb. The gnawing, acid fear of their predicament was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overlaid with a profound, almost reckless sense of purpose. He was no longer just a man trying to survive. He was a custodian of a secret that reshaped the future. This newfound resolve manifested as a strange, quiet calm that was deeply unsettling to his crewmates. While they saw only the endless, empty ocean, Caleb now saw a stepping stone. He kept the secret to himself through the 6th and 7th days. The warmth in the ovoid faded a few hours after his vision, but he held onto the memory of it, a private assurance that he had not gone mad. The daily routine became more brutal. The last of the nutrient bars was divided into 3 meager portions and consumed in a somber, silent ceremony. From then on, hunger was a constant, gnawing presence. The desalting pump became their altar, their work a desperate prayer for one more day of life. On the afternoon of their 8th day adrift, the sky began to change. The perfect monotonous blue of the horizon was bruised with a dark, greenish-gray stain that spread with alarming speed. The sea, which had been a gentle rolling swell, grew restless, its surface churned into an angry chop. "Squall line," Jessica announced, her voice grim as she squinted at the approaching weather. "A bad one. Secure everything. Double-check the lashings on the canopy." There was little to secure. They tied down the water cartons and the emergency kit, their movements clumsy from weakness and dehydration. Within 30 minutes, the world was a maelstrom of wind and water. The day turned to a slate-gray twilight. Rain, driven almost horizontally by the gale force winds, hammered down, stinging their exposed skin. Waves, which had once seemed so distant, were now monstrous, black walls of water that would lift their tiny raft to a terrifying height before dropping it sickeningly into the trough. The next few hours were a primal fight for survival. The storm tore their makeshift canopy away in the first 10 minutes, leaving them completely exposed. A rogue wave crashed directly over them, swamping the raft and nearly washing Ben overboard. They bailed frantically with their bare hands, the cold seawater shockingly frigid, their bodies screaming with effort. They huddled together in the center of the raft, a miserable, soaked trio, holding on for dear life as the storm tried its best to reclaim them for the deep. The storm passed as quickly as it had arrived. Just before dawn, the winds died down, the rain ceased, and the angry waves subsided into a long, exhausted swell. Dawn broke on a scene of quiet devastation. They were alive, but weaker and colder than ever. A quick inventory revealed the storm's toll. They had lost a carton of precious water, and the data slate, which had been in a supposedly waterproof pouch, had been submerged. Its screen was cracked and dark. It was completely dead. Ben stared at the useless piece of technology, his face a mask of utter despair. "It's gone. The egress plans. My sensor logs. Everything." It was their lowest point. Cold, starving, and now stripped of the last digital record of their journey, they were truly just castaways. Jessica stared at the horizon, her face grim, her usual resilience finally worn down to a fragile, brittle edge. And Caleb was quietly turning the ovoid over and over in his hands. That was what broke her. "What are you doing?" Jessica snapped, her voice raw. "Stop playing with that rock." Caleb looked up, his expression unreadable. "It's not just a rock, Jessica." "Oh, I know. It's the key to the alien library," she said, her voice dripping with a bitter sarcasm born of a week of misery. "Well, the library is at the bottom of the ocean, and we are dying up here. The beacon is getting weaker by the hour. We have maybe 2 days of water left. And you are sitting there, meditating. Have you lost your mind?" "Jess, calm down," Ben started, but she cut him off. "No, I won't calm down. We need a leader, Caleb. A captain. Not a mystic who has given up." Caleb looked from her angry, desperate face to Ben's hollowed-out expression of despair. He knew in that moment that their hope was gone. He had to give them a new one, no matter how insane it sounded. He had to share the burden. "I haven't given up," he said, his voice quiet but carrying a strange new authority. "I know something. The night before the storm, I connected with it again." Ben just stared, while Jessica let out a short, harsh laugh of disbelief. "You connected with it? Caleb, you were hallucinating." "It wasn't a hallucination," he insisted. "It showed me something. Proof that we weren't the end of its journey. There's another one. Another archive." "Oh great," Jessica scoffed. "Where?" "On the other side of the galaxy." "No," Caleb said, locking his eyes with hers. "Closer. Much closer. I saw it. It's on Mars." The statement hung in the air, ludicrous, impossible. Ben, the scientist, just shook his head slowly. "Caleb, that's a textbook hypoxic hallucination. Stress-induced delusion. Your brain is creating a fantasy to cope with trauma." "I know how it sounds," Caleb said, his voice pleading now. "But it was real. I was there. I saw the red canyons, the thin sky. I saw the gate." "Even if it is true," Jessica argued, her pragmatism a shield against his impossible story, "what difference does it make? We are dying here, Caleb. In this raft. Mars might as well be on the other side of the universe." Caleb knew words were not enough. He looked at their faces, eroded by doubt and despair. He had one last, desperate gambit. He held out the ovoid. It was cool and dark, giving no hint of the power it held. "Then don't believe me," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Let it show you. Touch it. Both of you. Touch it with me. Ben and Jessica stared at the outstretched stone. It was an invitation to madness, to follow their captain into a delusion born of starvation and stress. But in their hearts, beaten down by the storm and the endless sea, the tiniest, most desperate flicker of curiosity was sparked. What if he wasn't crazy? What if there was one more miracle left for them at the bottom of the world? Their hands trembled as they hovered over the stone, a final, terrifying choice between the cold, hard reality of their death and a single, impossible chance at hope. Doubt warred with desperation in Jessica's exhausted mind. Every rational part of her, the naval officer, the pilot, the pragmatist, screamed that this was madness. Caleb was succumbing to the pressure, and she was about to follow him down a rabbit hole of delusion. But then she looked at his eyes. They were not the wild, frantic eyes of a madman. They were clear, certain, and filled with a conviction that went deeper than logic. And in the end, it was the sheer, crushing hopelessness of their situation that made her choice for her. When death is a certainty, a 1 in a billion chance at a miracle starts to look like a reasonable bet. Okay, Caleb, she whispered, her voice rough with thirst. Okay. She slowly reached out her trembling hand. Ben, seeing her move, made his own decision. With the weary resignation of a man who had nothing left to lose, he extended his hand as well. Their 3 hands, chapped by salt and sun, met over the smooth, dark stone. For a moment, nothing happened. They were just 3 desperate people, huddled in a raft, holding a rock. Jessica felt a pang of bitter disappointment. It was a fantasy after all. And then the connection was made. It was not a jolt of electricity or a flash of light. It was a sensation of falling inward, of the world dissolving. The cold, damp rubber of the raft vanished from beneath them. The sound of the ocean faded to a distant memory. The oppressive weight of Earth's gravity lifted. They were floating, not in water, but in a silent, empty void. And then the void was filled with a world. They were looking down on a sphere of swirling, rusted red, a planet scarred by ancient impacts and cloaked in a thin, pinkish atmosphere. Together, they plunged towards its surface, a silent, shared consciousness on a journey across space. They soared over vast, dormant volcanoes and plains of red dust so fine it moved like liquid. Then, they dove into a canyon system so immense it dwarfed any on Earth, a colossal, jagged scar across the face of the planet. Down they flew, into the deep, frozen shadows of the canyon floor. The vision was not a dream, it was more real than reality, every detail sharp and perfect. They could feel the profound, ancient cold of the place. They saw the fine, red dust kicked up by their phantom passage. And then they saw it. There, carved into the sheer rock of the canyon wall, was a structure that had no place on that world, or any natural world. It was a massive, sealed gate, its surface etched with the familiar, intricate geometric patterns of the archive, a twin to the one they had entered at the bottom of the Atlantic. It was half buried, its creators long gone, sleeping under the Martian dust, waiting. The vision held for a full 5 seconds, an eternity of impossible truth, and then it snapped. They were back in the raft, gasping as if they had just been pulled from the water. The 3 of them stared at each other, their faces a mixture of shock, awe, and terror. The ovoid in their hands was no longer cold and inert. It was pulsing with a soft, steady golden light and radiating a gentle, comforting warmth. Ben was the first to speak, his voice a choked, reverent whisper. Vajes marineris. The scale, the geology, that was Mars. My God, Caleb, that was real. His scientific skepticism had not just been defeated, it had been annihilated, replaced by euphoric, terrifying wonder that lit up his tired eyes. Jessica was silent. She pulled her hand back from the ovoid as if burned, though it was only warm. She stared at her own palms, then at Caleb. Her pragmatism had not vanished, but it had been utterly transformed. The impossible story was true. And if that was true, then everything had changed. Their mission was no longer just to survive. Their survival now had a purpose that was bigger than themselves, bigger than their nation, bigger than their entire world. We have to get back, she said, her voice low and filled with a new, unshakable resolve. We have to tell them. The shared revelation transformed them. The despair that had been poisoning the air in the raft evaporated, burned away by the heat of their new purpose. The tension between them dissolved, reforged into a bond of shared, secret knowledge. They were no longer 3 individuals fighting for their own lives. They were a single unit, the sole couriers of the most important message in human history. They worked the desalting pump with a renewed vigor, their movements energized by more than just adrenaline. As night fell on their 9th day, they huddled close, the gentle warm light of the ovoid pushing back the cold in the darkness, a tiny, impossible campfire in the middle of the ocean. For the first time in a long time, they slept with a sense of peace. Jessica took the dawn watch. She sat, as always, scanning the horizon, but this time her search was not one of desperation, but of patient expectation. The world would provide. It had to. The story was too important to be lost at sea. The sun began its ascent, a brilliant orange disk painting the underside of the clouds. And in the growing light, on the edge of the world, was a shape. It was a tiny dark line, so small she thought at first it was a trick of her tired eyes. She stared, not daring to breathe, as it grew infinitesimally larger. It wasn't a wave. It wasn't a cloud. It was solid. She scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs, her voice cracking as she called to the others. Caleb, Ben, wake up. They stirred, their movements slow and stiff. What is it? Ben mumbled. Jessica didn't answer. She just pointed a trembling finger towards the horizon. There, she whispered, not daring to believe it, not daring to hope too much. Look, I think I see a ship. Hope is a dangerous, fragile thing. For hours, they did not dare to give it a name. They simply watched as the dark speck on the horizon grew with agonizing slowness, their hearts caught in a painful rhythm of hope and doubt. With every passing hour, it resolved itself into a more definite shape. First, a line, then a smudge of a superstructure. By midday, there was no longer any doubt. It was a ship, a massive one, likely a container vessel, judging by its high, blocky profile. It was a mountain of steel and salvation in their desolate, liquid world. The next challenge was one of pure, nerve-wracking judgment. The ship was on a steady course, but it wasn't heading directly for them. Its path would take it miles past their position. They had 6 flares. 6 chances. Not yet, Jessica commanded, her voice a dry rasp, her eyes narrowed with a navigator's focus. It's still too far. They won't see the flare against the sun's glare. We have to wait until its path is at its closest point to us. We'll only get 1 or 2 shots before it starts moving away again. They waited. The minutes stretched into an eternity. The ship grew, its towering form becoming a real, tangible object. They could see the individual containers stacked like colorful blocks. It was so close, yet so far. The urge to fire the flare was almost unbearable. Now, Jessica said, her voice sharp. Ben, get ready with the second one. Caleb's hands trembled as he loaded the flare gun. He pointed it at the sky, a high, hopeful arc, and pulled the trigger. With a loud crack, a cartridge shot upwards, leaving a trail of smoke before erupting into a brilliant, crimson star. It burned for a few seconds against the vast blue canvas of the sky, a desperate, fiery plea, before sputtering out. They waited, their breath held, their eyes locked on the distant vessel. Nothing. The ship continued on its inexorable path. Again, Jessica ordered, her voice tight. Ben fired the second flare. This one seemed to hang in the air longer, its red light a screaming beacon of their existence. They stared, their collective while trying to force the distant crew to look in their direction. A full minute passed. Despair, cold and familiar, began to creep back into their hearts. And then it happened. A deep, resonant blast from a ship's horn echoed across the water. It was the most beautiful sound they had ever heard. A moment later, they could see a distinct change in the ship's wake. It was turning. It was turning towards them. The relief was so sudden and so total that it was physically debilitating. Ben let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh. Jessica finally allowed her shoulders to slump, the iron rod of her discipline momentarily dissolving. Caleb felt tears tracking paths through the grime and salt on his face. They had been seen. They were saved. The rescue itself was a blur of exhaustion and overwhelming sensations. The container ship, the MV Odessa Star, loomed over their raft like a man-made cliff. Faces of strangers, a mix of Filipino and Eastern European crewmen, peered down at them with shocked expressions. A rope ladder was thrown down, and the difficult, final task of climbing began. It took the last of their strength, their weakened bodies barely able to pull themselves up the rungs, aided by the shouts of encouragement from above. The moment their feet touched the solid, vibrating steel of the deck, their legs gave out. They collapsed, the world spinning. The feeling of a solid surface beneath them after 9 days of constant motion was profoundly disorienting. The ship's crew was kind, helping them up, wrapping them in blankets, and pressing bottles of water into their hands. The cool, fresh water was a miracle, a true taste of life. After a brief but thorough check by the ship's medic, they were brought to the captain's office. He was a stern-looking Ukrainian man named Captain Orlov, with kind eyes that had seen many things on the world's oceans, but clearly nothing like this. Through a thick accent, he asked the inevitable question. We found no wreckage. No distress call from a mothership. Who are you? What happened? Caleb, designated speaker, took a deep breath. This was the next test. He had the ovoid, now cool and dark again, tucked safely inside a pouch in his tattered survival suit. We're marine biologists, Captain. Our research vessel, the Sea Wanderer, lost power in that squall a few days ago. We took on water too fast. She went down before we could get a call out. It was a simple, plausible lie. Captain Orloff nodded slowly, his expression giving nothing away. He had no reason to doubt them. They were 3 traumatized survivors. A strange story was to be expected. You are lucky we saw you, the captain said. My watchman thought your flare was a weather anomaly. I will log your story and report your rescue. We are bound for Lisbon, Portugal. We will be there in 4 days. You can contact your embassy from there. Lisbon, not America. A fresh wave of complications presented itself, but for now, they were alive. They were escorted to a small, clean cabin with 3 bunks, and a hot meal was brought to them. They ate in a ravenous silence, the simple stew and bread tasting like the most exquisite feast. Once they were alone, the door closed. They finally looked at each other. They were safe. They were warm. They were no longer starving. But the looks on their faces were not of simple relief. They were now in a new kind of wilderness, a world of 7 billion people, hiding a secret that set them completely apart. Their physical isolation was over, but their true isolation had just begun. Caleb placed a hand over the pouch containing the ovoid. The journey home was far from over. It had just entered its most dangerous and complicated stage. The 4-day journey to Lisbon aboard the Odessa Star was a strange purgatory. They were suspended between a hell they had barely escaped and a future so uncertain it was terrifying. On the surface, they were recovering. The ship's cook fed them simple, hearty meals that slowly began to rebuild their strength. The medic treated their sunburn and minor injuries. They slept in actual bunks, the gentle rhythmic vibration of the ship's engines a lullaby of safety. But beneath this veneer of recovery, a new and exhausting ordeal was underway, the maintenance of the lie. Their cabin became their sanctuary and their prison cell. It was the only place they could speak freely, and their conversations were held in hushed, urgent tones. Their new reality was a tightrope walk of deception. Ben, you have to stop talking about chemosynthesis, Jessica warned on their 2nd day. They were gathered in the cabin, the door securely locked. One of the ship's engineers asked you about your research, and you almost started explaining the biome of a hydrothermal vent. Our cover is that we study migratory whale populations. Whales, Ben. Big, blubbery mammals. They don't chemosynthesize. It's hard, Ben countered, pacing the small space. My entire life is science. They ask me a scientific question, and my brain wants to give a real answer. This pretending is exhausting. We're all exhausted, Caleb said, his voice calm but firm. But we have no choice. We act like 3 traumatized biologists until we get our feet on solid ground. We are grateful, we are quiet, and we are boring. Understood. They both nodded. The most difficult encounters were with Captain Orloff. He was not a hostile man, but he was observant. He would invite Caleb to the bridge, offering him a cup of strong tea while he oversaw his ship's navigation. His questions were always casual, wrapped in the guise of polite curiosity. This research institution you work for, Orloff asked one evening, his eyes on the moonlit sea. I am not familiar with them. Are they new? Relatively, Caleb lied smoothly, his heart rate picking up. They had invented a name for their fictional employer, the Oceanic Stewardship Institute. We're a privately funded non-profit. Small, but dedicated. I see, Orloff said, taking a slow sip of his tea. And your vessel must have been very advanced. To be operating so far from the main shipping lanes. It is a very empty part of the ocean where we found you. We were tracking a pod of blue whales, Caleb replied, sticking to the script. Their migration patterns have been shifting. We were on the very edge of our survey grid. Each conversation was a minefield. Caleb felt like a spy, every word measured, every expression controlled. His greatest source of anxiety was the ovoid, which he kept on his person at all times in a small canvas bag, tied securely to his belt. It felt like a lump of lead, a constant, heavy reminder of the truth. He resisted the profound urge to try and connect with it again. The risk of someone walking in, of him having another episode, was too great. The secrets of Mars would have to wait. In the privacy of their cabin, their focus was on the future. We can't just walk into the American embassy, Jessica stated, her tactical mind taking over. We're not on any official manifest. Our mission was off the books. To the State Department, we don't exist. We'd be buried in bureaucratic red tape for weeks, and that's the best case scenario. The worst case is we get flagged as unstable and sent to a psych ward. She's right, Caleb agreed. There's only one person who can help us. General Thompson. General Marcus Thompson was the high-level DARPA liaison who had personally briefed Caleb on the anomalous signals. He was the one man in their chain of command who knew the true, speculative nature of their mission. So how do we contact a US general from a payphone in Lisbon without getting flagged by every intelligence agency on the planet? Ben asked. We don't, Jessica said. We use a prearranged emergency protocol. A back channel. Caleb, you were given the failsafe codes, weren't you? Caleb nodded. A sequence of numbers. I have them memorized. It's a one-time use line to a secure satellite phone. But I need a specific type of terminal to even access the network. Their plan began to form. Once in Lisbon, they would need to find an internet cafe or library, somewhere anonymous. From there, they would have to access a public satellite mapping service to locate the specific type of communications relay they needed. It was a long shot, a complex technological scavenger hunt in a foreign city where they didn't speak the language. On the evening of the fourth day, the distant glow of city lights appeared on the horizon. The coast of Portugal. The crew gathered on the deck, watching the land draw closer. Their ordeal at sea was ending. As they stood by the railing, Captain Orloff approached them, his expression serious. We will be docking in 3 hours, he said. The port authorities will want to speak with you. I have filed my report. He paused, then looked directly at Caleb. My crew, they recovered something from the water when they were pulling in the life raft. A small piece of wreckage from your Sea Wanderer. Caleb's blood ran cold. Orloff pulled out his phone and showed them a picture on the screen. It was a jagged, scorched piece of metal, no bigger than a dinner plate. But on its surface, stenciled in a heat-resistant military-grade font, were a series of numbers and a single, unmistakable acronym, DSV-04. Deep Sea Vehicle 04. The Stardust. Your research vessel, Orloff said, his voice low, his eyes knowing. It must have been a very special ship. These markings, they are not for any civilian craft I have ever seen. He put his phone away. I have, of course, included this photograph in my official report to the maritime authorities. I wish you luck in Lisbon. He turned and walked away, leaving the three of them standing in stunned silence. The lights of the city seemed less welcoming now, more ominous. They were about to step onto solid ground, but their cover story already had a hole in it. A hole with an official file number. They were no longer just survivors. They were a mystery, and the world's authorities would soon be looking for answers. Docking in Lisbon was a violent, sensory assault. After the profound silence of the deep and the monotonous emptiness of the open ocean, the port was a cacophony of life. The scream of gulls, the deep-throated roar of truck engines, the clanging of cranes, the shouts of dockworkers in a language they didn't understand, it all merged into a disorienting wall of sound. The air, thick with the smells of diesel, salt, and fried food, felt heavy and claustrophobic. They walked down the gangway of the Odessa Star on unsteady legs, blinking in the harsh, late-afternoon sun, feeling as alien and out of place as if they had just landed from another planet. Their return to civilization was not the anonymous affair they had hoped for. Waiting for them at the bottom of the gangway were not just port officials, but two uniformed officers of the Portuguese Polícia Marítima and a stern-looking woman in a sharp business suit who introduced herself as a representative from the US Embassy. Captain Orloff's report had clearly made waves. They were escorted, politely but firmly, to a sterile, air-conditioned office within the Port Authority building. The woman from the embassy assured them it was just a formality, a standard debriefing for a maritime incident involving American citizens. But the presence of a lead investigator, a sharp-eyed woman named Inspector Sophia Rossi, told them this was more than just a formality. Inspector Rossi was methodical, her questions precise. She had them recount their story, starting with the sinking of the Sea Wanderer. They stuck to the script, their tale of a sudden storm and a catastrophic hull failure practiced and plausible. All three of them told the same story, their voices flat and exhausted, which Rossi seemed to accept as a symptom of their trauma. The embassy official looked sympathetic. For a while, it seemed like they might actually get through it. Then, Inspector Rossi slid a tablet across the polished table. On its screen was the photograph Captain Orloff had shown them, the scorched, jagged piece of metal with a stenciled marking, DSV-04. We've had our research department look into this, Rossi said, her tone neutral, her eyes missing nothing. This marking configuration, this font, it is consistent with United States military hardware, specifically deep-sea naval projects. It does not match any known civilian research vessel registry, repurposed or otherwise. Can you please explain this discrepancy? The room was silent. Ben paled. Jessica's expression hardened into a neutral mask. The embassy representative looked from the tablet to Caleb, her sympathetic expression replaced by one of confusion and suspicion. Their lie had hit a brick wall. Caleb's mind raced. Denying it was impossible. The truth was unthinkable. He had to build a new lie, a better one that bent around this inconvenient piece of reality. You're right, Caleb began, his voice steady, choosing his words with infinite care. The Sea Wanderer wasn't a standard research vessel. It was a prototype. A prototype? Rossi asked, her eyebrow raising slightly. Yes. A privately funded venture by a consortium of aerospace and marine technology companies, Caleb improvised, weaving a thread of truth into the fiction. They were testing a new type of hull composite, repurposed from decommissioned naval assets. That's why the markings are military spec. The entire project was proprietary, under heavy non-disclosure agreements. We were the scientific oversight team. It was a good lie. It was complex, technical, and explained both the military markings and their secrecy. It was also, he knew, a house of cards. It would buy them time, but it wouldn't survive a deep, official inquiry. Inspector Rossi stared at him for a long, uncomfortable moment, her expression unreadable. I see, she said finally. You will, of course, provide us with the names of this consortium. And your project director. Of course, Caleb lied. As soon as we are cleared to access secure communications. Rossi leaned back in her chair. For your safety and to facilitate the investigation, the U.S. Embassy has arranged accommodations for you. Your passports will be held by my office for processing until your identities and your story can be fully verified with your government. We expect this will take no more than 48 hours. Please enjoy the hospitality of Lisbon, but do not leave the city. It was a velvet-gloved arrest. They were free, but they were trapped. An embassy car took them to a comfortable but unremarkable hotel in the city center. The hot shower, the clean clothes, the soft bed, it all felt hollow, a temporary illusion of freedom. As soon as they were alone in their shared suite, the reality of their new prison sank in. She didn't buy it, Ben whispered, pacing the room. Not for a second. She doesn't have to buy it, Jessica countered, her eyes scanning the street from the window. She just has to follow procedure. And procedure is slow. Caleb bought us time. 48 hours, maybe less, before she calls Washington and finds out the Oceanic Stewardship Institute doesn't exist. Then we have to move tonight, Caleb said. We have to find that terminal and contact Thompson before this lie falls apart completely. Their new mission was clear. But as they began to formulate a plan, Jessica, still at the window, went very still. What is it? Caleb asked. She didn't turn around. She just tilted her head slightly. Across the street, the black sedan that pulled up right after we did. There's a man in the driver's seat. He hasn't moved. He's just watching the hotel in trance. Caleb and Ben joined her at the window, peering carefully through the curtains. The car was nondescript, but its placement was professional. Intentional. Inspector Rossi's surveillance was not going to be subtle. So much for enjoying the hospitality of Lisbon, Ben murmured. They were no longer just survivors. They were prisoners in a gilded cage, their time rapidly running out. And outside, the city of Lisbon, their only path to salvation, was now a maze filled with unseen watchers. Their escape from the deep had only led them into a new, more complex kind of trap. The hotel room, a space of supposed comfort and safety, instantly became the command center for a mission they were never trained for. The enemy wasn't the crushing pressure of the deep or the fury of a storm, but a single patient man in a black sedan. Their objective, escape a gilded cage and traverse a foreign city to make a phone call that could save their lives and alter the course of history. Okay, think, Jessica took command, her voice low and crisp, the naval officer in her taking complete control. He's watching the front. That's his job. He's expecting us to be scared, to stay put until the authorities clear us. He's not expecting a proactive move. We can use that. While she paced, assessing their tactical situation, Ben was already at the small desk, hunched over the hotel room's complimentary laptop. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. He wasn't a field agent, but he was a master of data. I can't use my real credentials, and I can't do a direct search for secure military satellite uplink. That'll set off 1,000 alarms, he muttered, more to himself than to them. But the protocol Caleb has uses a specific civilian band satellite as a carrier wave before it jumps to the secure military network. It's an old system, a Cold War relic. The terminal would need a high-gain, multi-frequency satellite dish. Uncommon, but not impossible to find. He began a cross-reference search, looking for internet cafes, data processing centers, and university comms labs in Lisbon, filtering for those with customer reviews mentioning unusually high-speed or stable satellite connections, the kind a sailor might need to call home from the middle of the ocean. After 20 minutes of tense silence, he pointed a triumphant finger at the screen. "Got one," he said. "A 24-hour internet cafe near the Kais du Soder docks. It's called Netport. User reviews say the connection is rock solid, even during solar flares. And the satellite photos of the building show a big, old, ugly satellite dish on the roof that matches the specs. It's our best shot." The plan came together quickly, a desperate but logical strategy. Jessica laid it out. "Ben, you and I are going for a walk. We'll act like stir-crazy survivors who need some air. We'll go out the front door, turn right, and head for the tourist district. We'll be the bait. We'll confirm he's following us. Caleb, that's your window. The moment we draw him off, you leave. The hotel kitchen has a service exit that leads to a back alley. You'll have 20 minutes, maybe 30, before the tail realizes we've split up. Navigate to the cafe. Get the message to Thompson. We'll circle back here eventually. Don't wait for us." It was a classic diversion. Simple. Risky. Their only option. An hour later, the plan was in motion. Jessica and Ben walked out of the hotel's main entrance, blinking in the evening light like a pair of disoriented tourists. They didn't look back. They just started walking, their conversation deliberately casual. 30 seconds after they turned the corner, the black sedan pulled away from the curb and followed them at a discreet distance. Caleb, watching from the window, felt his heart pound. The first part had worked. He grabbed the small bag containing the ovoid, his strange, silent companion, and made his move. He slipped out of the room, took the service elevator down to the basement, and navigated his way through the controlled chaos of the hotel kitchen. A few strange looks from the staff were all he got before he pushed open the heavy steel door of the service exit and stepped into a narrow, dimly lit alley that smelled of garbage and cooking oil. He was out. The streets of Lisbon at night were a labyrinth of cobblestone, steep hills, and winding alleyways. Caleb navigated with a map Ben had downloaded to a cheap burner phone they'd had delivered with room service, an anonymous tool for an anonymous man. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every pair of headlights approaching from behind sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He was a scientist, a deep-sea explorer, completely out of his element, playing a game whose rules he didn't understand. After a tense, 30-minute walk, he found it. The Netport Cafe was exactly as Ben had described it, a slightly seedy establishment tucked away on a side street, its neon sign flickering erratically. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and cigarette smoke. A handful of patrons were scattered amongst the terminals, a couple of merchant marines on a video call, a young backpacker, a few locals lost in online games. It was perfectly, blessedly anonymous. Caleb paid the proprietor for an hour of time and found a terminal in a secluded corner booth. He sat down, the worn keyboard cool beneath his fingers. He took a deep breath, calming his nerves, and began the complex login sequence for the fail-safe protocol, the numbers and codes flowing from his memory. He had found it. He was seconds away from contacting Thompson, from telling the world what he had found. "I wouldn't do that if I were you, Dr. Vance." The voice was calm, quiet, and spoke flawless, unaccented English. It came from right behind him. Caleb froze, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Slowly, he turned. A man stood there, having approached with impossible silence. He was dressed in a simple, well-tailored gray suit, his face unremarkable except for his eyes, which were intelligent, patient, and utterly devoid of emotion. He was not Portuguese police. He was not an embassy official. He was something else entirely. The man gave a small, almost apologetic smile. "It's a clever protocol, but the back channels have back channels. We were alerted the moment you accessed this network." He gestured to the chair opposite Caleb. "Please, don't send the message. General Thompson can't help you. But I can." Caleb stared at him, his mind reeling. They hadn't just been followed from the hotel. They had been anticipated. Their escape, their plan, their desperate race through the city, it had all led him right into a different, more sophisticated trap. And the man now sitting opposite him was not just a guard. He was the gatekeeper. For a few heartbeats, Caleb's mind was a perfect, silent void. The sheer impossibility of the situation had short-circuited every rational thought. The man in the gray suit sat opposite him, an island of calm in the noisy, smoke-filled cafe, and the world seemed to pivot around him. "Who are you?" Caleb finally managed to ask, his voice a low, unsteady whisper. The man smiled, a thin, bloodless expression that did not reach his eyes. "Who I am is not important. Let's just say I represent certain interests that have a deep and long-standing concern for global stability. Interests that were very interested in the anomalous energy signals emanating from the Puerto Rico Trench. We were watching your mission long before you ever left the docks." Every word was a hammer blow, dismantling Caleb's understanding of his own mission. They hadn't been pioneers on a secret quest, they had been lab rats in someone else's maze. "General Thompson," Caleb started, "is a patriot and a fine soldier," the man interrupted smoothly. "He operates within a well-defined, officially sanctioned box. We do not. When a discovery has the potential to rewrite science, religion, and the global balance of power overnight, you do not hand it to a committee. You hand it to people like me, who understand that some secrets are too dangerous for the light of day." The man leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping. "We know the Stardust was lost. We know you survived. And we have a very strong suspicion that you did not come back empty-handed. That object you protect so carefully," he said, his eyes flicking for a fraction of a second to the canvas bag at Caleb's hip. "We believe it is the key." As the man spoke, Caleb felt a distinct sensation. The ovoid, which had been cool and inert in its bag, began to grow warm. It was the same gentle, steady warmth he'd felt on the raft after the vision of Mars. But this time, it was accompanied by a clear, albeit non-verbal, impression in his mind. It was a feeling of profound distrust, a silent, urgent warning directed at the man sitting across from him. The archive, his silent partner, was telling him this man was a threat. "What do you want?" Caleb asked, his own resolve hardening, bolstered by the ovoid's silent alarm. "Cooperation," the man replied simply. "You and your crew have stumbled into a world you cannot possibly navigate alone. The Portuguese authorities, the embassy, they are all blunt instruments. They will classify you, discredit you, and bury you in a psychiatric evaluation until you forget your own name. All to protect a status quo that your discovery has just made obsolete. I am offering you an alternative. A way out." He laid his cards on the table. "Work with us. Give us your data, your experiences, and the artifact. In return, your problems here in Lisbon will vanish. Inspector Rossi's investigation will be closed. New passports and identities will be issued. You and your crew will be given new lives, comfortable and quiet, under our protection. Your discovery will be handled responsibly, shielded from the chaos of public revelation and the greed of competing nations." The offer was as chilling as it was tempting. A clean slate, safety, but the price was the truth. The price was the legacy of the builders, handed over to a faceless, unaccountable shadow organization to be locked away in a box forever. It was a betrayal of the archive's final, desperate hope to begin anew. Meanwhile, miles away in the bustling tourist heart of Lisbon, Jessica and Ben were concluding their performance. They had successfully led the black sedan on a meandering, pointless tour of restaurants and shops. At a crowded intersection, they slipped into a subway station, waited for a train, and then doubled back, emerging from a different station a few blocks away. A quick check confirmed their tail was gone, lost in the chase. "Okay, we're clear," Jessica said, breathing a sigh of relief. "Let's head back to the hotel. Hopefully, Caleb has had enough time." They began the walk back, oblivious to the fact that Caleb's situation had escalated from a simple escape to a high-stakes negotiation with a ghost. Back in the Netport Cafe, the man in the gray suit seemed to sense Caleb's hesitation. He knew he was offering a deal with the devil. "I understand this is a lot to process," he said, his tone softening with false empathy. "You are a scientist, not a spy. You believe knowledge should be shared. It is an admirable, if naive, sentiment." He reached into his jacket and placed a small, sleek, featureless black phone on the table. It looked like a piece of polished obsidian. "You have 1 hour, Dr. Vance. Go back to your hotel. Talk to your crew. Discuss my offer. When you have made your decision, use this phone. It has a single number in its memory. That is how you will contact me." He stood up, his movements fluid and precise. "But be warned. If you try to use that terminal again," he nodded towards Caleb's computer, "or if you attempt to contact General Thompson through any other means, or if you simply do not call me within the hour, my offer of protection is withdrawn. And I assure you, you will find the official channels far less accommodating than you can possibly imagine." With a final, chillingly polite nod, the man turned and walked out of the cafe, disappearing into the Lisbon night as silently as he had arrived. Caleb was left alone in the booth, the low hum of the computers around him suddenly deafening. On the table before him sat the burner phone, a dark promise of a safe but compromised future. The computer screen in front of him glowed with the login prompt for the fail-safe protocol, a gateway to the very people he was supposed to trust, now presented as the most dangerous path of all. He had risked everything to get here, only to find himself in a far more dangerous trap. 1 hour. He had 1 hour to decide the fate of his crew, himself, and a secret that belonged to the stars. Caleb left the Netport Cafe in a state of controlled panic. His mind was a maelstrom of fear and disbelief, but his body moved with purpose. He shoved the gentleman's sleek burner phone into one pocket and his own cheap one into another. He did not look back. Every step he took away from the cafe felt like he was being watched, not just by human eyes, but by a vast, unseen network that had anticipated his every move. The bustling, vibrant streets of Lisbon, which had seemed so alien and intimidating an hour before, now felt like the closing walls of a trap. His return to the hotel was a blur of paranoia. He took winding, indirect routes, ducking into crowded squares and down narrow side streets, trying to lose a tail he couldn't even see. He finally reached the hotel's back alley entrance, his heart hammering against his ribs, just as Jessica and Ben were rounding the front corner. He caught their eye from across the street and gave a subtle, urgent shake of his head. They understood immediately. Something had gone terribly wrong. They bypassed the lobby, taking separate, staggered elevators to their floor and meeting at the door to their suite. The moment the door clicked shut behind them, the facade of calm shattered. "What happened?" Jessica demanded, her voice a low, tense whisper. "Did you make contact?" "No," Caleb said, his voice ragged. He placed the gentleman's phone on the coffee table. It lay there, a piece of polished black void, humming with a silent menace. "They were waiting for me." Quickly, concisely, he recounted the entire encounter. He told them about the man in the gray suit, his impossible knowledge of their mission, the insidious offer of protection in exchange for their silence and the artifact. He told them about the threat, and the 1-hour deadline that was already ticking away. When he finished, the room was thick with a stunned, suffocating silence. Ben collapsed into a chair, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. So it's over. They know everything. We can't fight people like that. They're a government within the government. He looked at the burner phone on the table, a dark life raft in a sea of sharks. Maybe we should take the deal, Caleb. It's a horrible choice, but at least we'd be alive. We could live. Live in a cage, Ben. Jessica shot back, her voice vibrating with a defiant fury. We'd be their assets, their property. And the discovery, the single most important moment in human history, would be buried in some black site bunker to be studied by men with no names and no accountability. That's not living, that's a betrayal of everything we went through. What's the alternative, Jess? Ben cried, his voice cracking. They'll destroy us, discredit us as lunatics. We'll be the punchline to a ghost story. They looked to Caleb, the final vote in their fractured democracy. He was torn. The logic of Ben's fear was undeniable. The passion of Jessica's defiance resonated with his own sense of duty. He closed his eyes, and the deciding factor made itself known. The ovoid, he said, his voice quiet but certain. When he was talking, I felt it. The same way I felt it on the raft. It was warning me. It was telling me that man, and the people he works for, are the enemy. The archive didn't survive for eons just to have its legacy locked in a box by a group of cynical old men in gray suits. Its last message was, begin anew. We can't do that if we surrender. That was it. The debate was over. The trust they had in their impossible journey, in the silent intelligence that had guided them, was stronger than their fear. They were a team again, united in a single, terrifying purpose. They were not taking the deal. They were going to run. Okay, Jessica said, her mind already shifting to tactics and logistics. The deadline is in 22 minutes. When that hour is up and we haven't called, they'll assume we've refused. They'll likely give the order to the Portuguese authorities to bring us in. That's our window. After the deadline, but before the police arrive at our door. And the man watching the front of the hotel? Ben asked. He's not the only one now, Caleb surmised. That phone, he pointed to the device on the table, is almost certainly a tracking device. They know we're in this room. Good, Jessica said, a predatory glint in her eye. Then that's our diversion. She walked to the window, but she wasn't looking down at the street. She was looking across, at the building next door. It was a slightly older, ornate apartment building, its roof just a few feet lower than their hotel room's window ledge. They're watching the doors. They're watching the elevators. They're tracking that phone, she said, her plan forming in real time. They are not watching the sky. We leave the phone here, let them think we're still debating. Then we go out the window, across the ledge to that roof. From there, we can get to the fire escape and down to a different street. They'll be watching the front of the hotel while we're already 3 blocks away. It was a crazy high-risk plan straight out of a spy movie. It was also their only chance. Ben looked from the window to the 10-story drop to the street below, his face pale. Caleb looked at the phone, its silent presence a countdown clock to the moment their lives would change forever. Ready? Caleb asked, his gaze meeting theirs. Ben took a deep, shaky breath and nodded. Jessica just gave a sharp, determined grin. Their decision was made. The die was cast. In a few short minutes, they would be fugitives, with no passports, no money, and no allies, hunted by 2 governments in a foreign city. But they would be free, and they still had the key to the stars. The final minute in the hotel room was the longest of their lives. The sleek black phone sat on the table, a silent testament to the deal they had just refused. The air was thick with the unspoken question, what happens now? There was no thunderclap, no immediate consequence, just the quiet, steady hum of the hotel's air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city below. The deadline passed. They had chosen their path. Now, Jessica commanded, her voice cutting through the tension. Before they realize we're not going to play their game. Getting the window open was the first obstacle. It was a modern hotel, designed for climate control, not ventilation, and it was sealed shut. It took the combined desperate strength of Caleb and Jessica, using a floor lamp as a makeshift lever, to finally break the lock with a sickening crack. A rush of cool night air filled the room. The ledge was terrifyingly narrow, barely the width of a person's foot. 10 stories below, the street was a river of light and motion, a world away. A steady wind whipped around the corner of the building, threatening to unbalance them. Jessica went first, her movements economical and sure-footed, a testament to her training. She pressed her body flat against the cold stone of the hotel wall and sidestepped her way across the gap to the adjacent roof. Caleb followed, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He didn't dare look down, focusing only on the rough texture of the wall under his fingertips and the safe silhouette of Jessica waiting for him. Ben was last. He was a man of science, his body unaccustomed to such physical peril. He froze halfway across, his legs trembling, his knuckles white where he gripped the window frame. I can't, he gasped, his voice thin in the wind. Yes, you can, Ben, Caleb said, reaching back, his hand a steady anchor. Don't look down. Look at me. One step at a time. With Caleb pulling and Jessica directing, Ben shuffled the last few feet, collapsing onto the gravelly surface of the neighboring roof, his body shaking with a mixture of fear and relief. They were across. They were out. From their new vantage point, they had a clear view of the street in front of their hotel. Just as Jessica had predicted, their escape had gone unnoticed. But moments later, their decision made itself felt. 2 official-looking black sedans, different from the first, pulled up silently to the hotel entrance. Several men in dark suits got out and walked briskly into the lobby. Simultaneously, the distant but unmistakable sound of approaching sirens began to grow louder. Time to go, Jessica urged. Their journey across the rooftops of Lisbon was a surreal, breathless scramble. They moved in the shadows, climbing over ventilation ducts and ducking behind chimneys, the city sprawling around them like a sea of jewels. The sirens grew to a wail, and they saw the flashing blue and red lights of police cars swarming the entrance to their hotel. The trap had been sprung on an empty cage. They found the fire escape on the far side of the building, a rusty, skeletal ladder that groaned in protest under their weight. It led them down into a dark, narrow alleyway smelling of damp stone and stale beer. They were back on solid ground, anonymous and unseen, 3 blocks from where their pursuers thought they were. They were free, but they were also utterly adrift. They had no money, no passports, no phones. They were fugitives in a foreign country, hunted by at least 2 powerful, shadowy groups. 4 hours, they walked, sticking to the darkest, least populated streets, their journey guided by a desperate need to put distance between themselves and the hotel. They eventually found a temporary sanctuary in a vast, derelict warehouse near the abandoned section of the docks. Inside, it was a cavern of shadows and silence, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against the nearby pier. Here, in the cold, damp darkness, the true hopelessness of their situation finally crashed down on them. We did it, Ben said, his voice hollow as he sank onto a pile of old canvas. We escaped. But what now? We have nothing. We can't contact Thompson. We can't prove who we are. We can't even buy a loaf of bread. We're just ghosts. He was right. They had made their defiant stand, but it had led them to a dead end. Despair, a foe they had vanquished on the raft, had found them again in the heart of the city. Caleb felt the familiar weight of the ovoid in its bag at his hip. He had protected it, had followed its silent warning, but for what? To end up here. Defeated, he pulled it out. In the darkness of the warehouse, it began to emit its soft, golden glow, a warm, impossible light in the oppressive gloom. And then it did something new. A thin, razor-sharp beam of light, no wider than a pencil, shot out from the surface of the ovoid. It projected a complex, glowing image onto the dusty brick wall opposite them. It was not a message or a diagram. It was a pattern of stars, a celestial map of impossible clarity and detail. They stared, mesmerized. Ben, the scientist, the astronomer, moved closer, his exhaustion forgotten, his eyes wide with academic curiosity. "I know this," he whispered, tracing the patterns in the air with his finger. "The constellations they're inverted. They're from a southern sky." He pointed to a bright, distinct cluster of stars. "That's the crux, the Southern Cross. And that bright star it's highlighting, that has to be Alpha Centauri." "The archive showed us a map of the galaxy," Jessica said, her voice filled with awe. "Why is it showing us this now?" "It's not just showing us," Caleb said, a new, wild understanding dawning in his mind. He turned the ovoid slightly in his hand, and the projected star map moved with it, like a flashlight beam. "It's pointing. It gave me a warning. Now it's giving us a direction." The archive, their silent, sleeping benefactor, had woken up just enough to offer them a lifeline. It wasn't a plan or an answer. It was a destination. A single, cryptic clue in a puzzle that spanned worlds. It was pointing them south, towards the other side of the planet. Their journey was not over. A new, even more impossible leg of it had just been revealed in a shower of golden starlight on a dusty warehouse wall. The glowing star map on the warehouse wall was a declaration. It was an answer to a question they hadn't even known how to ask. Their journey wasn't over, it had merely paused. They were not at a dead end, they were at a crossroads, and the archive itself was giving them a signpost. "The Southern Cross," Ben breathed, his voice filled with a reverence that transcended their squalid surroundings. "It's pointing us towards the Southern Hemisphere. Brazil, South Africa, Australia, somewhere. But why?" "We don't know why," Jessica said, her practical mind already grappling with the impossible logistics of the clue. "And it doesn't matter. What matters is that it's a direction. A destination. It's the only thing we have." Hope, which had seemed lost forever, ignited once more. It was a wild, desperate, and utterly insane hope, but it was enough. The path forward was revealed, not by a government official or a secret contact, but by a beam of light from an alien stone. Their choice was to either rot in a Portuguese jail or to follow the starlight. It was no choice at all. "So how do we get to the other side of the planet with no money and no passports?" Ben asked, the enormity of the task crashing back down on him. Caleb looked around the derelict warehouse, at the massive cargo doors that opened onto the dark, lapping water of the Tagus estuary. "We came from the sea," he said, a quiet resolve in his voice. "And we'll return to it." Their new plan was born of pure desperation. They would become stowaways. It was a journey back into a familiar kind of isolation, a small, dark space, surrounded by an immense and dangerous environment, their lives in the hands of fate. The next 24 hours were a blur of calculated risks. They were ghosts in the machine of the city. They slipped into a public library, where Ben, his face obscured by a borrowed cap, used his 15 minutes of allotted computer time to scan maritime shipping schedules. He found their target, the Marisol Trader, a rusty Panamanian-flagged tramp freighter scheduled to depart at high tide the next night. Its destination, Santos, Brazil. South. The night of their departure was cold and moonless, a perfect cloak for their activities. The port of Lisbon was a city unto itself, a chaotic landscape of towering cranes, mountains of shipping containers, and the constant hum of machinery. Guided by Jessica's innate understanding of naval operations, they moved through the shadows, a three-person infiltration team on a mission against impossible odds. They found the Marisol Trader at a poorly lit, remote berth. It was an old, tired-looking ship, streaks of rust weeping down its hull. It was perfect. Security was a single, bored-looking watchman who spent most of his time in a small, brightly lit shack near the gangway. Waiting for the right moment, when the watchman was distracted and a loading crane provided a screen of noise and shadow, they made their move. They scrambled up the gangway, their movements swift and silent, their hearts in their throats. They slipped across the deck and found an unsecured hatch leading down into the ship's cavernous hold. They descended into the darkness, the heavy scent of diesel and bilge water welcoming them to their new home. They found a small, cramped storage locker filled with ropes and old canvas, far from the main crew quarters. They slipped inside, pulled the door shut, and were plunged into absolute blackness. Hours later, a deep, shuddering vibration ran through the entire vessel. A deafening blast from the ship's horn echoed through the steel walls of their hiding place. The floor beneath them began to move, a slow, powerful, inexorable motion. They were underway. They had done it. They had escaped. Days later, they were still in their dark, cramped locker, their existence a return to a Spartan routine. They survived on water siphoned from a maintenance pipe and the few scraps of food they had managed to scavenge before boarding. They were hungry, uncomfortable, and utterly uncertain of what they would do when they reached Brazil. But they were not without hope. On their fourth night at sea, Caleb took out the ovoid. In the suffocating darkness of the storage locker, he held it up. As before, the beam of light projected onto the grimy steel bulkhead, the map of the southern sky a steady, silent beacon. It was their compass, their guide, their promise. They were no longer Dr. Vance, the scientist, Jessica Riley, the pilot, or Ben Carter, the biologist. Those people, along with the submersible Stardust, were lost to the deep. They had been reforged into something new. They were custodians of a sacred trust, couriers of a message that had traveled across the stars and through the abyss to find them. The last message from their lost submarine had been one of discovery, but the message they now carried was one of destiny. Huddled together in the darkness, three fugitives heading south, illuminated by the golden light of a distant constellation, they were ready to begin anew. Their true journey had just begun.